2024 regular board work session, currently at Center for Advanced Learning Conference Room. We have in attendance tonight, Chris Howard, Chair, Kathy Kuhnke, Vice Chair, Blake Peters, David Ligatich, Director, Dr. Myra Gomez, Director, Dr. Sean Barnes, Director, James Hughes, Superintendent, and excused this evening is Holly Riegelman. We have a quorum, and so with that, if there's a motion to approve the meeting agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Then moved by Myra, seconded by David to approve the meeting agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. First up is policy review, first reading, and I believe this has Mr. Cook's name on it. Looks like it's been a while on these.
So we have a number that are pretty straightforward tonight. The first one is AC, non-discrimination. The committee recommends, because there weren't many changes, recommends accepting the second bracketed sentence in the fourth paragraph. You go down there, it's highlighted for you to look at. Otherwise, it isn't a substantial change. That's it.
And
The second, if you want me to, if there's any questions, I can take them now, or I can move.
why don't you just move?
Who is for non-discrimination, who is our district? So
It'd be me, this position. So Title IX, civil rights, and there's a list of others as well.
No wonder it hasn't been enforced.
Thank you for the vote of confidence. Comments.
Oh. Okay, so does that, where does that show up then, John? Does that show up on the website?
It does.
Okay.
Under family information and the whole list of who's there. And then if you do have a complaint, it'll take you to that anyway, so it's all linked together.
Okay, all right. So no other changes on that one?
No other changes on that one, so I can go to CBG. There are a number of cosmetic changes there, but nothing's really substantive. It's for you to consider, some capitalization things, other things, cleanup.
The bracket language is optional, right?
Bracketed, you mean,
Yes.
yeah, thank you.
We have to do it at least once a year. You could do more frequently.
Can we take out at least once a year?
No, the bracket is you have to do at least once a year by law, but you could do twice a year.
No, I wouldn't want to do
Do
one.
4 times a year.
I thought it was maybe the other way around, where we could have some wiggle room, like in an off year or something like that.
And we'll get to that. Evaluation of administrators is coming too, so that is how most administrators are.
All right. So anything else on that one, John?
No. Evaluation of administrators, we can move to that, because the committee recommended deleting the last sentence, bracketed sentence of formal evaluation will be conducted regularly at least once a year, because that was restrictive, and what I've described to the committee is we're on a 2-year plan, like you just alluded to, Sean. And in the second year, there's a summative evaluation, but each year you're observed, discussed, and you meet twice a year, at least with your evaluation.
Admins are on probation for 3 years. That's an
That's
answer
true,
for the
too.
first 3 years, and then
Okay,
And remind me again, John, the yellow highlight, is that just the information from OSBA?
Yes,
explaining why
that's
it.
it'll come out when we
Okay,
forward it.
okay. That's new. I don't remember them doing that before. So.
Questions on that policy? Then we will move forward to first aid. This was an entertaining policy to discuss. Yeah. First aid, there's a lot of language here that's required by law, it's in the statute, so it's there. We have elected to, well, this policy, EBBA is recommending deletion. The policy I'm about to get to incorporates this into the new policy. So I'll move forward to that. And it's incorporated into, where is that? Yeah. Thank you. It is incorporated into a couple of different policies. What we have done tonight too, that I should qualify is, there were a number of first aid, student health services related policies that have come this year. We decided to package those together this time and try to get it to you all at once, even though some of them are not necessarily required. That way we're all looking at all of them at once and try to do the cross the crosswalk between policies. So student health services is a pretty straightforward policy as well. It's what, these are the elements of a plan that you need to have, and we do have those elements in the plan. That's not new language, but at the bottom is new language. If you look at number 12, we're recommending a deletion that's been incorporated in another spot. The designated employees was taken from that paragraph right there, was taken from the policy that's being recommended for deletion and put into this. The committee thought it would be valuable to keep. And then the rest of this is recommended by OSBA. And the committee didn't have concerns with that.
A one first aid card for 60 students.
Yes.
How
When I checked with HR to see, I asked that question directly, it didn't seem too cumbersome. When you combine new employees as well as employees who are on whatever safety response team you have, it's a pretty simple standard to meet. If anything, we're probably over that in most cases.
That's 20 to 30 in our conference.
If you imagine even coaches who have to renew almost every year, every other year, and you count them in, you're good to go.
Is there a annual or maybe every other year opportunity for staff members to get trained for free by the district?
There is, if they want, most people take advantage of the ones who are on safety teams or coaches, we still pay for that once it's renewed. And yes, there are annual opportunities. It's either through the ESD or our own nurses.
That's if they're identified to be one of the responders, not just for their own,
That's true.
keeping their skill level high. I've been selected to be one of the people needed for us to meet this requirement and respond.
Okay.
In emergency.
And typically, who are the,
If you're in the Second Elementary, for example, you're gonna have some of the office staff. Custodian is likely to. Your principal, if necessary, is gonna remain certified. So those are some of the examples, people that are more flexible in this. Yeah, and special educators as well.
I remember that we were invited, if we wanted to get trained, just for our own knowledge, we could.
I believe that's still the case, but I have not asked the question. Other questions on that?
The other thing with this policy is it did take an AR that got they're kind of doing that now, taking some ARs and pushing them into the main policy. So I think that's why this one is kind of a delete this, add this. Mishmash.
AR's administrative
Admin-
regulation, it's the policy. The basics of what you have to do. The AR is the stuff that may change more frequently. It's the operational part of implementing the policy. So the AR is there usually as direction for staff or folks what to do. And then if it's not working, they can tweak it without having to come back through a whole review process. So that's what an AR is.
Thanks.
Still remember.
No, that's good.
That's fine. Next policy is EBBAA, like it says on the highlight there, it's a proposed policy from OSBA. I think the policy is fine. It's how you would respond to infection control. And if a kid has a bloody nose and they're bleeding in a room, how is that handled? And the custodians are the ones with the best training to handle that, so they know what to do. They have the chemicals, they have the equipment, they would handle that. This just outlines how it be done. Moving forward from there. Safety threats. This generated a good amount of discussion within the committee, partially my fault. What this says is if you look at number 4, and it's proposed, but this is statute. I recommend that we adopt
Sorry,
it.
what page are you on?
I am on, it's EBCA and it is 15.
115, okay, I
Yep.
just want to make sure I was in the same place, all right.
So this is new law that requires districts to report about safety threats. Most of it just makes sense. There was, a number 5 in here that said that you had to, report what was done to resolve the issue within 24 hours. We've had 2 this year that took longer than 24 hours. So I had some concerns about, I'm not gonna meet policy, I'm not gonna meet law just because we weren't able to resolve the police weren't able to resolve those things. So I met with OSBA and said, and gave those examples and said, this is a little too restrictive for us. Not that it's gonna, we can meet it most of the time. And Spencer suggested the highlighted language, second paragraph on the bottom. It says if action takes more than 24 hours, it would be impossible to provide a communication, it would be impossible to provide a communication on how the situation was resolved within 24 hours of the initiation. And then it gives us some leeway in how we communicate different things at different.
Spencer provided that language.
He did. Lots of questions on that? And that would be the last of the policies for the board to consider this evening.
Okay. So they will come to us at the next business meeting.
Next business being December 4th.
I think so. Okay.
I think we're communicating enough now. It's every time I make this, it's actually like,
Where it says many communications, right? Let me get back. Okay. So next, let me turn on the right page, here we go. We had, information before, and now we're having a first reading on the City of Gresham Enterprise Zone Support Fee, and this has Superintendent Hugh on here.
thank you, Chair Howard. At the October 16 work session, the board engaged in a conversation with Stacy Michelson from Government Affairs Liaison with the MESD, Erica Fitzgerald from the Economic Development Department of the City of Gresham, around enterprise zones and questions that board members may have had as far as how does it work? And at that point in time, we thought it would be appropriate for the board to take some action on 15%. I think after a very robust conversation, we decided that didn't have enough information to get back to another work session for further conversation. So that's what we're doing. We have included some information from both Stacy Michelson and Eric from City of Gresham on some additional information. And then this afternoon, I forwarded you an email that has additional information that Vice Chair Keithley had asked for some clarification, and I was able to get some information clarified, but wanted to engage the board in a conversation as far as the decision points. I will say for the record that Centennial School District has approved the enterprise zone at 15%, with the 1% that the city is going to take for fees. Tonight, Stacy Michael said that the district, because they have their session and they're looking to also 15%, 1%. So outside of that, you might want to engage in a conversation, and if there's anything that answered for you or additional questions that you both have, I would ask you share at this point in time.
James, why 15 if we have the option to go as high as 30?
I think it's because the 15% allows for incentive for businesses that would like to participate in an enterprise zone function or process within a city. Doesn't necessarily have to be in Gresham, but they're within. I think we had discussed the last time that for us, as a school district, whatever local revenue that we collect, the state school fund is something that, equalizes. So if we collect less money from local tax, then the state school fund actually fills in that gap. So we're not necessarily getting less money. If we collect more money here in the city, from property taxes, then it means that more local revenue has been collected, therefore we get less money from the state. And, board members have questions around what's the, relationship between the 15% versus the 30. I do know that, in the communication that I forwarded to you, Stacy Michelson had asked USDA, and then their recommendation for municipalities and school districts is the 15% versus the higher rate.
I think wasn't the question, if we get 15% from this, we get 15% less from this side. then we're paying 1% for this 15%.
Yeah, so that also was discussed, and I think I shared some information from Stacy where the actual 1% that the city would take off the top for administrative fees, it means that we would get potentially 1% less, but what it would do is then the state would equalize that percent. So we're not gonna get any less. The district will get the money, from taxes and like those administrative costs are taken off the top, then we would get equalized from the state. So I think those were some of the questions that you folks had. I know it was a pretty robust conversation the last time, but that's my understanding of where we're at. And we're asking for this to be first reading. If you're not ready to make a decision tonight, we can certainly move it to the next meeting. But I think the last time they talked, they really do need a decision by roughly February, because that's when there's an opportunity for microchip to renew their expansion.
So I have a thought, question, you sent an email, which is pretty thorough. And the total, I just want to make sure, is it truly 35,000, or is that like one of those budget items where it's like 35 million, you know, like?
Yeah, so that's a great question because, you know, Erica kind of got from her colleagues at the city what 2023, because we're trying to see, okay, what would that actually look like? Remember that enterprise zones, this is for new or expanding. So we really can't give you specifics. She just used some 23 data. So I don't know how relevant that actually is. It was just a number that they kind of gave as far as the amount of money, but that's actually, you know, at least in the grand scheme of things, not necessarily. But again, you folks wanted more specific information around what are we talking about? Are we talking millions? Are we talking hundreds or thousands of dollars? I think that the city did a good job of gathering that information.
Well, yeah, because if it truly is 35,000, you know, you've seen those budgets where it says 35,000, but it's 35 million or something like that. You're just, it truly is 35,000, that's changes my perspective, because my worry is 350,000, 3.5 million, something like ginormous, really impact if there was a default or something like that. 35,000 in the grand scheme of it is.
My concern that I pointed out to all of you over was that I didn't know how this might affect our finance department if we had to you know, collect the money. But, you know, the reality is we do have folks allocated who they do accounts receivable and accounts payable. So we do have staff that could, you know, push out invoices. Just don't know how many that's going to be. I believe we would have to hire somebody. We know until we enter into the agreement, and that's where in the IGA, if we choose to move forward with this, it's going to be, you know, flexible where we're going to need to be able to negotiate within the year if things change. But right now, I'm cautiously optimistic based on what I have heard from the city and what I've talked to Stacy about, is that it is going to be more work for the district. How much, I just don't know at this point in time.
No, I understand that, and if the IG, if my understanding is correct, that 1% would get basically reimbursed, for lack of a better term, by the state. So we're held harmless on that. You know, 1% of 35,000 is 350. You know, which isn't much, and so you take it off your plate. I think for me, seeing a number like this, which is based on the data, of course, it's gonna have a new data point next year. But this helps give me a perspective.
Which is why I asked the question, and it does put it into perspective. We know that it could, you know, go up by 10% next year. We don't know that, but this is the clarifications that were helpful for me. And I wonder if it was changed at all in the resolution or the IJ that we have, because in the resolution, it says the district or the sponsor of the enterprise zone would do such and such, like mail out the invoices. that is not described in the IGA. So if that is the expectation that they are, because the next question was, if we have to, will it be absorbed into a position? And again, I really appreciate, you don't know, so we almost have to go through this process to see. But that was the other thing about, we've been told that we will be made whole. We've been with nothing in the contract, but in an MSD letter, MESD letter says the 1% that they take off the top will be reimbursed. Great news. That's not in the IGA either, and not necessarily that it should be, but there was something in the IGA that said the records will be made available or will be available if we choose to. Well, at least me, I would like to be specific on this first year. I want to look at it. How much time was used? Did you have to hire a position? Were we made whole? Were we not made whole? So that we can evaluate, whether or not this is really working for us. And if it isn't, I mean, it's got to be a pretty big ding in order for us to take this back. But this was really helpful information for me.
And what I can tell you about the IDA, it is a draft. And you as the board can set date, then you would direct your superintendent to ensure that those aspects of the IG are in place. Make sure that you have updated information. So if you would like in a year presentation to say, what was the impact of the agreement? We can certainly include that, but there's not specificity right now in the IGA just because it's a draft. So I appreciate the conversation, and certainly our team will make sure that before we agree to anything with the city, that we have included some opportunity to gather that data as Mr. Pinkley has asked.
And I think not for this time, but it seems like this is every 10 years. Is that what I understood, right? It's more than 10 years.
Five.
Oh, every 5
years,
years. So because it involves the other school districts, just like when we have those legislative meetings, all of us in Multnomah County have the opportunity to move and discuss it. It would be good to discuss things like this too that are local, but affect all of us. So that we all, because I'm still wondering, like, why 15/30? We can potentially get more money for our district. Why? And is it because, and you said that it's because we're trying to make it attractive for businesses. Well, if it's a partnership, then.
We're not getting more.
Right, that's what Sean clarified, right? But for like all of us to understand that, like all the other board members too, like for all of us to talk about, like, yeah, what are the benefits to this? Are there any benefits? Like what you're asking about, FTE, how are you guys handling it? Who's doing it for you? That kind of stuff, right? So we can all be on the same page, and also it'd probably save, this person time too, instead of going to all 4 districts or 5 districts to do the same presentation, just do it to all of us once, and we all ask the questions together, and we can all discuss it together.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a first reading. We don't have a sample resolution. I would feel more comfortable on the IGA, going through our legal process to make sure that some of the questions that have been brought up are addressed. In particular, as far as the board resolution and where it goes, that it's a 5-year plan. I don't know where that is now. There's been so many pieces of paper, but if it's 5 years, then where's that at?
It's in the resolution.
Where in the resolution?
It's the enterprise zone. Well, like it's in the statute.
That's not.
Where, I'm looking at the resolution and I don't see it.
Must be in the
3 to 5
IGA.
years. Right here.
Okay, but it's not in this board resolution.
It is not.
So
It
it
is
sounds like we need just a little bit more tweaking on it. A little bit more just verification on some of it. Myra's thought is a good one, that we need to make sure that we're coordinating this a little bit better with the other districts so that we're not all attacking it in a different way. We should have a consistent response to it so that they're not having to recreate something every single time they want to do this. And then an annual report of how is it doing. They're promising us as an enterprise zone to provide jobs. I'd really like to know what jobs they're providing and what they're doing that benefits our community.
Well, I have to say that, that was part of what the information that we wanted, not specifically the jobs, but I didn't feel like the information provided to us last time was really a good sell in terms of, like you brought up all of the benefits that you brought it up, the city did. And so I think there could have been a much better, educational piece for the board about what it was. But Chris, to that point, Erica from the city said, we said, well, what are the numbers? Do you know what they are? And they said, well, they aren't required by law in the enterprise zone to actually report what the jobs are that are either gained or lost.
Correct.
So if we want, and I still would love that. I mean, from an educational white paper, anytime this comes before the board, the city should provide in an enterprise zone, the benefit to the school district of participating, even if it's anecdotal and they can't list specific numbers personally, but I didn't ask all these questions till today, my bad. So I wasn't gonna ask that one because that would have been way too much information to gather, but I was incredibly impressed with what you were able to gather, and clearly it helps to put it in perspective.
So as we now have a little bit more information, we've had the presentation, some more stuff that's in part of this. My suggestion is it comes back to the December 4th meeting or action.
Yep.
Yeah, for action on it at that point.
And I will, ask, when this happens again, hopefully some of us around to remember, but, it would be nice to see what the actual, what is collected each year. You know, right now, it would have been 5. Is it close to that? Is it closer to something higher?
Well, but I think that's a good point that we should clarify. In the resolution and or the IGA, is it just a note to administration, city and district that we want an annual report? Not just it's available if we so choose to gather it, but we want a report annually so that we can monitor how much is going in, how much is going out. Is that something you want to include?
I think that's my perspective would be that's the IGA. Us leveraging political weight to say, we made a big. And then that way, the cycle, the superintendent.
So can you add that in there, the IGA?
Again, the GA will probably be approved after you make the resolution, because we have to run it by attorneys, they have to run it by attorneys. And so I just wanted to be clear that the IGA may not, but I'm very clear on the expectation that you want within the IGA.
Do we
So
need to put that in the resolution in order for it to go in the IGA or not?
No, because it's operations.
Yeah. Make sure that Mr. Cook and the team has the information that we will reflect in the IG before it gets.
That just goes in our list of things that we get an annual update on.
And the only other clarification for me is that in your response from Erica at the city, it says we will invoice for it, and that is not in the IGA either. It is not clear in the IGA.
We
So
will,
that's an expectation.
we will be clear. Yeah, we will be clear.
So will we see the same resolution?
It'll need to be cleaned up a little bit to include perhaps the years, and we'll figure out what goes in the resolution versus what is negotiated with the IGA. But it sounds like we want to at least see some information. A resolution should have somewhere, somehow, that we're doing this for a set amount of time. Because it says in here we can do it for 3 to 5 years, but it sounds like somewhere they're telling us they'd like to have it for 5 years. And make sure that we have it documented, Sean, so that in 5 years.
Yeah.
People are like, what are we doing with this? Why are we doing this again? So, okay. What's that?
Right.
Oh, yeah, it is, bottom, director of the Park Rose, somebody cut and pasted it. So,
Which.
and it's a draft, and so it's gonna say draft. on
Well done.
it. Okay.
Yeah, an idea to float, just hearing. Doing over Myra's. Alignment between school board. This does enter us into the economic development sphere, and I just wonder if there might be even like. Once a years development summit with other. Political leaders specifically in East County, we talk about more regional issues and the way that education.
So-
We do so many things like with other school board members. There's value there. There's also value in tightening our bonds a little bit with these county leaders.
But we haven't had one for a couple of years, so coincidentally, I had a good chat with, some of the Multnomah County board members at the SBA convention. And we put into place some conversation about getting one of those scheduled. And so it would include board members, it would include locally elected, so it would include, our state representatives, our senators, the folks that are involved. It would include, I don't know if we talked about the city specifically, but we've done those a couple of times. It's just been a few years since we've done one. So, yes.
Well, because you're working on that, I would say absolutely include the city, particularly because we are now partners.
I just don't remember before. Paul
No,
was
I know,
there.
but I just say, throw it in if you haven't, because I think
Right.
that's important.
And I would also suggest that Stacy might, that she represents Gresham-Barlow and East County school districts. And she's a governmental liaison and support both statewide issues and regional and local issues as well. So you should start seeing a little bit more of Stacy this spring when we start getting into the long legislative session. But I will make sure I touch bases with her and share that request. Help us with the region.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll move it forward with a little bit more information. Do this.
So December 4th.
Yeah. And then make sure that we put into place that follow-up part that's with the other districts, because it doesn't make sense to have everybody out there doing it and Stacy going out and doing 5 different presentations. Doesn't make much sense. Okay. Next up are our information items, and we have a couple of things, so I don't know if you guys, it's in order. We have it as the fall academic data review, transformative social emotional learning, SEL update, and the disciplinary handbook rollout. And I know we have guests this evening. I'm not sure who's presenting which. Okay, you raised your hand. You're presenting on something, so we're gonna go ahead and go with the fall academic data review.
There we go.
And introduce yourself just to make sure that everybody in the room knows who and who is watching this.
Good evening, I'm Heidi Lasher, I'm the Director of Elementary Curriculum and Instruction. And I'll be sharing elementary beginning of year data with you today. These are assessments that are some more formal assessments that we conduct in elementary school. It's aligned with your core goals of achievement, academic data.
So before you go too far, I just have a quick question. We have in our board packet the middle school,
Yes.
so we don't like. Gotcha. Okay, I just want to make sure that. Thank you.
Oh, don't do that one. Don't do this one. Okay, sorry, I probably did that. Okay. Here we go. So before we get started looking at data, I thought it would be helpful for us to review the simple view of reading, will make the data make more sense. So the simple view of reading, you see we have decoding, which is word recognition and your phonics and phonemic awareness. And that along with language comprehension, which is your background knowledge, vocabulary, grammar, syntax, equals your reading comprehension. So we use assessments, DIBELS, which I'll explain more upcoming, to measure word recognition, and iReady to measure language comprehension, and iReady to measure reading comprehension. We use a lot of other assessments in elementary school, classroom formative assessments and lesson data, but these are our more formal assessments that we use. The DIBELS is the dynamic indicators of early literacy skills. And what they measure, there are 6 subtests that measure skills that are involved in reading words, the decoding portion. So it measures phonemic awareness, phonics and decoding, and fluency. Phonemic awareness is hearing the sounds in words. Decoding this phonics and fluency is the rate in which you can read a word. Or so first we're going to look at students who measured in DIBEL needing intensive support. They needed intensive support with word reading. So when you're looking at data for students needing intensive support, you're looking for decreasing numbers over time, data over time. So we'd be looking for decreasing numbers because we're looking for less students who are needing that level of support outside of core. So here's our data, series of years, and what you're going to want to look at is you can go across rows to look at students' data, to look at a grade level, see how our system is moving. And you can look at a diagonal, follow the color chart to see how a cohort, it's not an intact cohort, so there are different students who move in and out of these cohorts to see how students are progressing in a cohort. And this is, like I said, to students who measured that they needed intensive support for decreasing numbers. 1920 is the last time we measured pre-pandemic. The measurement that we used was Dibbles, but it's called Dibbles Next, and we now use Dibbles 8th edition. It's a little bit more challenging, so keep that in mind too. When students are in about second grade, the level the rate that they need to read to be at a little bit faster, and there's some additional measures in Dibbles 8th edition.
So if the number had not decreased as you hoped it would, I mean, I know it's still up from 1920. It's part of that is because of the difficulty.
Well, it's just something to take into consideration. They aren't the exact same measure. There's a bit of increase. So given these numbers, what a couple of our key takeaways here are that with a couple exceptions, numbers are decreasing across grade levels and cohort. And that with the exception of fifth grade, we are below pre-pandemic measures in students who measured as needing intensive support.
Any idea about why for fifth grade?
Why for fifth grade?
Yeah, like the only grade that hadn't gone.
Curriculum.
Yeah, so if you look at the impact of, and then coming back from pandemic, the impact of their education over time is one of our most effective group that's right now. We also started our decoding skills curriculum last year for third, fourth, and fifth grade, and for the primary grades we started for the year before that, as far as intense focus on that grade. This is measuring students who are at or above course. So we're looking for increasing numbers here. So these are students who measured in this fall, beginning of the year, indicating that they are at course. So once again, we can look across the rows to see how a grade level is doing. So it's more of a systems view of this. And if you look at the diagonal, you're going to see students in a relative cohort. So we're looking for increasing numbers. And, oh, sorry.
No, I want to see the note.
Okay, so now numbers across cohorts and grade levels. And we have 2 grade levels that are starting the year above pre-pandemic numbers.
So my question kind of relates, there's a huge jump second through. And how is that? Is there an attribution or reason why we see that? I mean, I have my presuppositions, but. So in every year, that seems to be the biggest jump.
Year to year.
Yeah, from year to year. And is that because of the focus for grade literacy? Is there something changing in a classroom that would amplify those gains?
Yeah, things changed quite a bit from second grade to third grade. The measure is measuring a little bit, leans a little bit more towards fluency and comprehension. There is one comprehension measure in there.
Will they end up?
But
Well,
This year,
so they gain and then flatten. And so I'm just wondering if that jump. Is that awesome? Like that jump?
The other thing that historically has happened is second grade and fourth grade have been kind of stuck point historically with our reading data. It tends to be a point where we either kind of stall or lag a little bit. And I know Heidi has some more data that will talk specifically about those grades. But there's something that happens with those assessments at that time, along with our reading, but also with our language development assessments as well. So there's some developmental things and some kind of expectation things that start to come into play there as well.
Is that's an education-wide trend, not?
Tends to be, it's not just a Gresham-Barlow thing, yeah.
So I'm just trying to remember back, because Dibbles is a word I knew and I never actually knew it had an acronym to it. I just thought it was Dibbles. So first grade, the testing part of it, is that a teacher evaluating a student
Mhm,
watching,
Mhm.
seeing,
mhm.
as opposed to when we get to fourth and fifth grade, are the students doing it electronically, or are they still being tested and reviewed by a teacher?
Most of the assessment is one-on-one. There's
Okay.
one sub-test where students, read and they fill in blanks.
Okay,
It's more of a,
and that's more, would be like a fourth or fifth grade, maybe
Mhm.
third grade, okay.
the fourth grade.
But the subtests, so just like, and the subtests do change over time, even through the course of a year,
Mhm.
or depending on the grade, so.
Okay.
This is a look at second grade, and you can see it's the previous year's composite score and this year's composite score for all of our students, our emerging multilingual learners, and students with IEPs. So what we can see here is that we have a growth measure in all groups, growth is measured in all groups, but our EML measure the largest amount of growth. And this is a celebration for us. Second grade is often that year where sometimes we see more of a discrepancy. The disproportionality happen, so
Between the three.
between,
Areas.
yeah. mhm.
Our spread students make up their jump too.
This is another one of those years Tracy's talking about, fourth grade, and you can see the points of increase between the groups. And once again, our emerging multilingual learners. That's-
What time of the year did they take the test?
So they take the test 3 times a year, and this is our beginning of the year assessment.
Okay.
When you disaggregate, do, do our dual language immersion programs emerge as? Are they driving that growth, or is
There's
it?
a separate slide for them,
This is-
that I'll show.
This one is.
Good question.
See
This is English instruction classrooms, yeah.
the bottom.
You know what, I didn't see the bottom.
And we will definitely.
But we love that you're.
Thank you, Blake, for the segue to the slide. So this is, these are our DLI students, and there's a lot of data in here, so I'm gonna, point us to a couple spots. And I know you're going to learn more about this from our DLI program from Montessori in the future, but so if you can see right here, our district, students who are at or above 4 is 48% at fifth grade. And for DLI, in at least one language, 50% of the students are at 4. And then when you move over here, you see that in DLI, the white column, 32% in fourth grade and 31% in fifth grade of our emerging multilingual learners are at or above 4 in at least one language. Now, district-wide, for our emerging multilingual learners, we have 25% at fourth grade and 18% at fifth grade, which takeaway here is when both languages are considered, DLI students begin to close the gap for emerging with multilingual learners. If that makes sense, did you follow that?
A
I
little.
didn't. I
So-
didn't.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
So right here, if you look at, or let's look at fifth grade, 31% of our students are at or above in at least one language. District-wide, 18% of our students are at or above 4.
Oh, got it.
And when you're become fluent in the language, that reading a language, those skills transfer to your other language that you're learning eventually.
So one of the things that's really exciting for us with this slide is as you look at those first 3 or 4 years of DLI, if you unpack that data, our DLI students are not meeting the standard in either language at the same rate as our English only students are. And you expect that with DLI research. You also expect that at fourth and fifth grade, and as you go into middle school, that's when you really start to see DLI students take off and outperform other groups of students. And that's what we're starting to see in fourth and fifth grade. So our data is nicely falling in line with what we'd expect from a DLI program, even though we started it during a pandemic.
That's the other piece of this.
There's
It
an
is-
inverse phenomenon. K-12, first through third above it. Correct. So help me understand why that.
So because students are learning in just Spanish, they are not passing the assessment in English or Spanish, right? As you get to fourth grade, their skills are becoming stronger in one of the two languages. That's the part where it's in at least one language. So our DLI students are assessed in both English and Spanish. And in at least one of those languages, they are meeting that standard, that grade level standard.
We start assessing them in both languages in second grade, because they start their English word decoding instruction in second grade.
And the reason that's so important, research shows that if you can gain literacy skills in one language.
Yep.
You're much more likely to gain literacy skills in any language you learn, right? And so we're seeing that gap start.
And most students do it by third grade, but theoretically and historically by fifth grade, they're fully bilingual in both. But a lot of students do it by.
So now we're moving on to iReady diagnostic, and what this is an adaptive measure that students take at their level. And we use this to support our instructional decisions, but also, we use this as a formal data points, what students are doing. And iReady is, we use this more to measure the comprehension part of the simple view of reading, whereas DIBELS we just talked about we use that to measure word decoding. DIBELS is more sensitive to the word decoding, and then iReady is more sensitive measure for the comprehension, literature and information. Okay. So this is a view of our fall data. And it is, you can see the scale at the bottom, mid or above grade level is green, lighter green is early on grade level, one grade level below is yellow, and so on and so forth. This is measuring end of year grade level standards. Students now to where the standards that they would be at the end of the school year. What we're working on for comprehension is our next steps with language comprehension is we have 93 teachers across the district throughout the school year up to the spring are participating in learning walk centered on an analytical reading and writing routine to work on language comprehension skills.
So the 24-25 data is projected for year end 2025?
No, this is where they measure right now against end of year grade level standards.
So the 24-25 is measuring the end of the last two shown.
It's and measuring right now,
Right.
where students are compared to end of year grade level standards.
So
Where they should be.
oftentimes being
Where they should be at the
assessed
end of
on
the year.
content they haven't been taught yet.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Is that also what that have 22, 23 or that end of year?
that was beginning of year. It's measuring, comparing the beginning of year each year.
It looks like. Maybe I'm seeing it wrong, but I'm trying to do the cohort thing. Seems like there's more kids going into the red in the deep red.
From
One,
fourth
two,
to fifth.
yeah,
From first to third.
first.
So the deep red's not possible before third grade
Well,
because second grade is 2
Yeah.
levels below. There you go.
so, I mean, but it, I mean. 29 plus 22 is 53%, 51%. Maybe I'm doing them that.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So like third graders in 23, 24, 19%, 29% fall. In the.
Correct. Yes.
I see. what you
And if you go back, so you have 51% are in the red, whether it's cheap or not. Third grade, second grade, it was 41%. First grade, it was 14%. That's a curious trend. And it doesn't seem like there's that much of an increase. I mean, there is an increase in reading, but there's not that much of an increase in reading versus.
One of the things that I'll share with you, I'll kind of bounce ahead just a little bit to show, here. The red arrow on the left shows the sequence of intervening. And it starts with phonological awareness, frequency, phonics, vocabulary, and comprehension. We've put a lot of effort in the last 2 years on word recognition and word decoding. And not that we haven't done professional development or language comprehension, but this year we are really intensely focusing on learning blocks for, like, I mentioned those 93 teachers who are going through classrooms and learning an analytical reading and writing routine that is partnered with our ELD department to make sure that we have it scaffolded for meeting strategies that meet the needs of all learners within that routine. So that is an area of focus for us. And you are seeing data that shows that.
Are teachers gonna be observing teachers in other schools or just teachers in their homes?
There's observing teachers from other schools. And teachers in their own.
I think the other thing to remember with iReady is one of the things that we look at probably more than this data is mid-year and end of year and look at the growth. And it does help us identify what typical growth would be for a student as they're making progress through the year or with stretch, thank you, stretch growth. And so those are the pieces that become really important with an assessment like this, where right now we're testing them on things they haven't been instructed on yet, which is different than DIBELS, where it's more dynamic for what's happening like at that point in the year and where kids should be. So that's just an important thing to remember when we're looking at iReady data.
And one thing you can see about looking at these domains here, with that focus on phonics, you can see more of the increase across phonics, all across levels for now. Another thing I was going to share with you is this shows national measurements as well. So the middle column is year to date, where student how students perform nationally year to date, the national average. So you can kind of see how we compare.
Which I mean, it's a growth mindset, but I just
Yeah.
don't think they're so. Not. It's not how to see that chart. Compared to the year-to-date data. That was, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We're talking about-
Yeah, absolutely. And one slide that I did skip was that comparison by English learners. See the difference in disproportionality, and I mentioned how we're working across departments to make sure that every professional development that we provide, make sure that the strategies are included that support our emerging multilingual learners. And we're also working across on co-planning with classroom teachers and EML specialists and special education teachers.
What is yes and no? Sorry.
Yes means, yes, you are an emerging multilingual learner, and no means you're not. According to the information system.
And this is the why behind us really focusing all of our efforts around EML, right? Really thinking about students that aren't performing, not supporting in the same way as we are other students. It's part of the why behind us starting DLI and thinking about how do we support students differently that are learning in 2 languages.
And it's a focus for our targeted schools and improvement as well.
And the strategies, the particular scaffolding strategies that work for emerging bilingual students work for monolingual students.
Definitely.
So
So
I know
students
we were
that
talking about
are,
DIBELS,
yes.
but in that
So
first chart, that the DIBELS ELL was positive, it was great growth. When will we see that transposed to here?
That's what we're looking for is growth for that.
But it's connected,
Mhm.
right? I mean, you would assume that as you progress and continue that,
Right.
it will show up here. So I'm saying that we're on the right track. We have
Yes.
things in place. We've had, positive outcomes in an area that ultimately will manifest in another area, as long as we stay on course, right?
You have to have the skills that are measured by Dibbles developed first, to then be moving into the skills that are more measured by iReady. So it is, they do assess different things.
To be able to read the assessment and answer the questions. The skills that you're getting, that's measured in Dibbles, you're better able to read the text that you're being assessed on.
What do you call the rules? What?
It assesses more the word recognition, phonics, phonemic awareness.
Okay, and is that? I'm just trying to piece it together, is that some of the governors and ODE's push toward more direct instruction?
Those foundational reading skills that are about how do I break down a word and learn to read it? Yeah.
Been implemented more than, like, been implemented for.
It went to cycles, like depending on when you were trained to be a teacher, you
Yeah.
learned to teach phonetics,
But,
and then they told us not to, and then we're being told to.
but like district-wide, in every classroom, phonics instruction is happening with fidelity across every classroom in our school district, K-3. And 3rd through 5th grade, they just started their journey last year. They received their training and started last year. And K-2, this is their 2nd year of full implementation.
And I'm sorry, I'm hogging, so in a traditional, like, in your textbook. Your phonetic focus. Is K-2, then 3 is when they start reading for comprehension.
We do all of it in all grade levels, and the word study is more advanced in 3rd through 5th grade. But K-2, it's more basic word study.
Okay, so meaning more complicated words to pronounce and read.
Yeah, and working on, different vocabulary. But all grade levels also work on the language comprehension portion of this view of reading as well. So we have 30 minutes in word decoding, and then the rest of their literacy. Comprehension.
Thank you.
Okay, move into that. So now we're moving into math. And this is the iReady diagnostic, that same diagnostic we talked about, but this is for math. So it measures math in the different domains listed there, numbers and operations, algebra and algebraic thinking, measurement, data, and geometry. And it does measure students according to the end of year grade level standards. So this is a look at fall to fall for math.
I'm still seeing the same trend. Is that a byproduct of the assessment maybe? Or is that the true measure of their ability?
You mean because the increasing, right?
Because it doesn't, so. I know personal experience, I read it's pretty tough. And so, it doesn't look like we're making a lot of gains. As a matter of fact, it looks like we're losing ground each year. Is it that we are truly losing ground or is it that the test is maybe not the best assessment of their ability?
I think,
And this is the beginning of your assessment, so we're looking for. Yeah, go ahead.
and
Yeah.
iReady is a test that kids have to read. So there are
What's that?
There are questions to read on a computer. And so so one of the reasons we start with reading instruction is because reading instruction impacts all the other subject areas. And so just thinking about, speculating a bit about what you're asking, Sean, it might be about the level of reading that's also associated with these tests that actually do math. Is potentially a piece of that.
Because I also know Star 360, which perhaps, you're going over the goals. It has that I'll read the question to the student. In math, obviously not read, and so I wonder,
And if you can get kids to do that and some of those things, there's,
yeah, of course,
there's
but
lots of.
It's a snapshot in time.
We have a long way to go in math, obviously. You would expect a cohort from third to fourth to fifth to start higher in the red because the amount of skills that they wouldn't know and hadn't had previously in fourth and fifth grade increase. Right, so this is just the beginning of the year, but that is expected in iReady.
Because here you're also measuring standards that they need to know by the end of the year.
And
A stretch learning.
And
year.
you have it, you would. I'm not saying this is acceptable, but I am saying you would expect to have a higher percentage in the deep red as you move into more complex math. Yeah.
I see,
This
because,
is just tested in
because
the fall.
those in light red are going to fall.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Cause you're adding fractions, you're adding like beginning pre-algebra, and there's a huge jump between third and fifth grade.
A question for another day, but promotion and grade advancement is automatic. That accurate? It doesn't matter how deep in the dark red you are. Is that for social emotional reasons? It's certainly not correct.
It's more research reasons. If you hold students back, the likelihood of decrease almost exponentially. And each student grows at a different rate when it comes to academic skills. So one boy might just be plateauing for a couple of years and then suddenly pulling them back doesn't necessarily solve that plateau and doesn't increase risk.
So just taking it further, if a parent said, right, my child was just struggling and they went to the district and said, we'd like them to repeat it. As a district's position, generally, that's not a good.
We'll walk the parents through the research. There have been times when we've said, yeah, that's okay. It's not an absolute that you won't. I can think of 2 or 3 in my career though. I mean, and that's a while. So when you walk parents through the research, then you find out how we can support that and get those ideas. That tends to be the most effective strategy.
As part of a broader conversation, I guess, I believe you.
Yeah.
And I think the difficulty from a parent's view is like, you got a child who's struggling.
Mhm.
They can't get on IEP because they're showing any growth. If they're showing any growth, no IEP. And then you watch them flounder at home, trying to catch up with their peers, and they're dropping relative, but as long as they're making just straight line gains from where they were yesterday, there's no IEP, and I think that's what I'm kind of struggling with.
And my question would be, what's the level of support that the child that's now in an upper grade, a student that's up in an upper grade, that is not prepared to do that? Does the teacher then have to teach at that student's level? Or is the student just expected to catch up or stay up as best they can?
It's a combination of a lot of them. What can be done in class to help a kid access? What can we do to help parents at home support students? Is there a reason to reevaluate for spend? You're also asking some pretty complex, because we could spend a few hours, love to do some pretty complex things on laws that have changed over the last 40 years for good reason of what we've learned about child development, and then why are we still starting schools the way that we are because of what we now know. There's a huge conversation about this nationally. What should we be doing differently because we've learned so much about child. That's not really where we are now, and I'm happy to have this conversation, because that's really where you guys are at, and your questions are right on the point. The other thing that's happening really a lot right now is the ability for kids to access using technology now, having things ready to them that we didn't have 20 and 30 years ago, how they can dictate and have access that way and avoid that skill problem of, I gotta write this down and this stresses me out. The tools that we have available now that we're not using as well, because we just haven't embraced them as much yet, could give kids a greater access and increase learning and help them keep up a lot better. So it's a really broad conversation, lots of questions that you're asking, it's very good.
But it's also the foundation of MTSS.
Yes.
Like when we start to talk about an MTSS system that looks at how kids are performing and looks at a whole kid, like how does attendance play into this? How does behavior supports play into this? When we're looking at a whole student and thinking about how do we support students, that's what MTSS, I'm looking at Michelle because we all know she does MTSS, but that's how we're looking then systemically at what do individual students need? How do we support them? What really is the challenge? Is the challenge really about math or is the challenge because they're not coming to school? So what we need to do is figure out how to support the family in getting the kid to school. If it is not about attendance and it is about academics, then what's going on there that we can start to figure out to then determine, is it an IEP? Is it not? Is it, what's the opportunity that the kid's missing to help them make the growth that we need them?
And I think maybe, to build on that, because I was thinking just that, when next time that we see this data, like, and maybe having some examples of what the tiers of support look like under for each grade level. And these are interventions that we hear and hear, just so we can put the two together.
Yeah.
And what teachers get from this assessment as well, and from ongoing students engage in iReady, and you know that on their Chromebook every day. What they learn is what are just right prerequisites that students need to work on that matches the classroom instruction. So there's additional small group instruction that takes place for students who aren't there yet.
iReady assessment, like skill assessment, is that perfectly aligned with state standard? So like if we were interested in exploring what is the reading standard that aligned?
They're aligned.
I think it'd be really cool if you have a teacher who's doing a good job with that, like implementing the MTSS supports with their literacy instruction or math instruction, to have them come and share what they're doing in their classroom. Not that I don't like hearing from you guys.
That's my tip.
Reminder that we are newly adopting iReady right now, so there's a lot of professional development and math lab opportunities and lesson studies that are happening across our schools right now. Yeah.
I was just gonna say that just to read the chart too, from 23-24 to 24-25, that's the same cohort of kids from 4th grade to 5th grade. And so that same cohort of kids tested, only 8% were in the green, and then in 5th grade, that same group of kids is now 11%. And the red zone is roughly it's a little bit higher by about 1 percentage point, but you'll see the yellow has shrunk. And so what that means is that there is a gap, but the gap at the red is roughly the same, and the green grew by 3%. So I think that that's also telling about it's not just within grade bands, but it's that cohort of kids that you're working with over a period of time, which is another way to look at the growth.
And this is a look at our English learners in math as well.
Yeah, I get it now.
This just reinforces our work on cross-fitting strategies to support our emails, and we'll continue to monitor growth for our emerging learners and all students. Cross-fitting strategies are strategies that you become familiar with and have expertise so that we can help teachers across grade levels and across school.
It also creates consistency for kids.
Yes.
Right, so if 3rd grade teachers are using similar strategies to 4th grade to 5th grade, kids connect how they did something across grades.
Well, I don't know if Heidi or you, Tracy, have mentioned, to remind our board that when we have targeted schools, it comes with additional funding to provide that PD for our emerging minds.
Some of the funding is coming.
Yeah. Yes. Federal funding, it's one of the, Title III is one of the federal funds.
In future presentations, I think we would like maybe ask how aligned is it to the state test? It would be interesting to see end of year data compared to the state test, you know, how many passed the state test versus how many passed or, you know, is in
Yeah.
green with this. And I would venture to guess there's probably more kids passing the state test than are green with this. It'll be interesting to see the gap in.
This is beginning of year data, but our.
Well, yes,
It does correlate.
Roughly.
it'd be interesting just to see that data and see how well does it. Because I know nationally, yes, of course, maybe it correlates. It doesn't really correlate.
Seems like, yeah, I got that for you.
Tim's like,
Okay, so this is, a comparison over years in each domain. You can see the increases are for beginning of year to beginning of year. And then this was that same, but similar slide that we saw in for math compared to national norms and national year to date.
Does some of that have to do with the number of days that students are in class? Doesn't Oregon have one of the shortest school years? If we're comparing national to,
It might, it could have back.
I'm all for year-round school.
Me too, I am too.
I did it while we were in this district
You're all
many
for
years
what?
ago.
Year round.
Year-round school.
I taught year round and I loved it.
Yeah, I was a student in year-round and I loved it.
And that is the last slide that I have for you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Engaging in the data with me, appreciate it.
But wait, there's more.
But now,
Kathy, were you gonna say something?
Well, I want to just reflect on the data that we got and how easy it was to read and reflect. I think the level of conversation reflects how easy it is, and I'm sure it had nothing to do with what we've been asking for, but it did. It's exactly what I was looking for. And I appreciate seeing the areas where we haven't improved yet. It's because that's where we get the from, so all that.
thank you.
So jumping from elementary to middle school. And before we jump in, I just want to say the conversation around growth is going to be the same conversation we're going to have with STAR. With them, this is the first year we've offered STAR, and so we don't have the same opportunity to look at growth over time. So this is more baseline presentation in terms of here's where we are. And some of the things we're doing in relation to some of the known challenges we have around our EML students and also our special ed students. So you'll see some of that as we go through, but recognize this is just a baseline. And I'm excited to come back in the winter time to talk about growth specifically as we work with STAR. They've emphasized over and over as we've done some trainings, getting teachers and administrators up to speed. They've said time and time again, here's how you read the data, but wait till you get your second data point to start looking at what growth looks like and the impact that the instructions have on student learning. So recognize with this one, as opposed to iReady with growth over time, this is really taking a look at our kind of our benchmark before we jump into our data point number 2 that happens in January. So with that, STAR is what we're using at the middle school, grade 6 through 8. This is aligned to the achievement goals that the board has set. So once again, looking at data specifically. 2 pieces to this one. The first one is what is STAR? Why did we change and move away from iReady? We had been using iReady for a number of years at the middle school level. We shifted over to STAR, and then we'll take a look at what did our baseline assessment tell us. So let's start with what is STAR and why did we choose it first? So with that, STAR is an online assessment similar to iReady. It's research-based. It offers assessments in both language arts and math. It can be used both as a screening tool and also as a progress monitoring tool. So one of the elements of STAR that our teachers found attractive, you can, not that this is best practice, but you could have a student literally take the STAR assessment every day. The test bank is large enough that the student will receive duplicate questions. So if you wanted to, you could test a student every single day of the school year because the test bank allows that. We don't use it that way, but it's a robust number of questions and it's a robust framework around assessing students. As far as the design is concerned, helping educators, it's really around thinking about how do we identify student needs within the classroom? How do we use assessment to drive instruction? And our teachers are still in the process of learning that. How do we get to set realistic goals around growth? So that focus on growth over time, that growth mindset. And then taking a look at how we track progress through the year, both on an individual level and then also the classroom. Thinking about that growth mindset as we go through it. So that's what STAR is about in a nutshell. There we go. What is it measured? On the language arts side of things, basic vocabulary, basic comprehension. Literacy is about plot, character analysis, theme development, those sorts of things. Being able to identify author intent, so analyzing structures of passages and even getting into analyzing arguments are the things that the language arts side covers. Math is more traditional, numbers and operations, algebraic reasoning, geometry measurements, that's probably are what STAR measures on the math side. We ran a pilot this last year. Our teachers are looking for a diagnostic to replace iReady. One of the challenges that our teachers found with iReady is that there's no time limit. So some students were taking 3, 4, 5 days to complete the iReady assessment at the middle school level. Some students relished in the fact that it took that many days to complete the iReady assessment. So our teachers are looking for something that would take less time out of the classroom, but still provide valid and reliable data. The STAR assessment is much shorter. It takes about 40 minutes to complete. So just that in and of itself was a savings of a couple of class periods for many, many students. It is aligned to state standards, and I'll show you, Sean, in just a few minutes, the correlation graph that we have. Math is a much stronger correlation than reading, but you'll see that in just a moment. It's available in Spanish, which is important to us, knowing that our DLI program is moving into 6th grade this next year. And we also wanted to make sure that we had teachers do some beta testing for us this last spring, both general education, special education, teachers all the way across the board. I'm not sure that we piloted it in EML classes, but we did have EML folks looking at this specifically as far as the tool is concerned. Once again, the focus and the emphasis on growth is one of the things that our teachers were drawn to with STAR specifically. So,
Before you go into the data, I love this why, and that was kind of iReady is, would we ever consider, because of the why with the STAR, switching to STAR because of all of these great things versus an iReady
Elementary level.
to the elementary?
The iReady is aligned with our curriculum. So it, it's not just a diagnostic, teachers use that for instruction. And it's aligned with all that. So they can get a report from iReady that helps them understand where they need to support students.
But both assessments are aligned to the state standard, so they can still see the
Yeah,
standards
yeah.
that kids are being, are meeting.
yes, and they measure in different ways. So with STAR specifically, the way STAR measures, so even though they talk about standards, the student does not get a question on every standard in math, every standard in language arts. What it does is it's a computer adaptive test, and it starts asking questions, and if a student gets the question right, it asks different questions more difficult. And so what it tries to do is triangulate what a student knows and is able to do based on just a 40-minute snapshot, so to speak. So in terms of which one's more robust, I think iReady has more questions, which tend to make me think it's a more robust assessment. But the correlations that STAR is able to do, because they have so many students that have been run through the STAR diagnostic, is they're actually pretty accurate with that 40-minute snapshot in terms of kind of connecting the dots backwards to what students know and are. But recognizing the assessment is a little different in terms of the way that it's structured. And it's guessing, it's approximating what students should be able to do in regards to math. So that's an important piece to recognize as well. STAR, in my understanding, was developed to be a predictive, its background, so to speak. And so you'll see when we get to the data, a lot of the data sections is around predicted state test scores. So even though the students have tested in the fall, what STAR has done is run a whole bunch of stats on students in Oregon. And it says, based on where students tend to be who score like this, here's what we predict they'll score in the springtime. And the predictions are actually fairly close. The accuracies, well, you'll see the correlation in just a moment. So how did our students do? The first thing I want you to see here as far as participation is concerned, we're a little lower in participation than we were with iReady when we offered that. And part of it was just our teachers getting up to speed on learning the new tool, the new diagnostic, and those sorts of things. I also want to point out that students have the chance to take the diagnostic in Spanish or in English. And about 1% of our students opted in to take Spanish this time around, as far as the language of practice. So either one is validated, whether they take it in Spanish or English. Students have the chance to do that. Those are the only two languages that STAR offers. They don't offer other languages.
I would want to take it in both and take the high score.
See whatever's better.
See where I do better.
Yes. So Sean, this was your question. So along the bottom of the graph is the student's score from the spring OSAS math test. And on the y-axis is their math percentile rank from STAR. And so what you see is if a student scored low or towards the left on their OSAS spring score, they were a fairly low percentile rank on their STAR assessment this fall. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if they scored well this last spring, what we noticed is they actually tended to score fairly well on the STAR assessment in the fall. So there's a pretty strong correlation between how they did on OSAS in the spring and how they did on STAR in the fall. And the correlation provides a nice line. If I were doing research, I'd be very happy with that. The reading data is a little less clear. And this is where my mind goes to. I'm curious, is the issue the assessment, either on the OSAS side of things, STAR side of things? Because when you take a look at students that scored poorly on OSAS, so the numbers are off to the left side of the lower axis, you've got kids scoring from the 0 percentile to the 100th percentile, even though they scored poorly on the OSAS assessment. Is the issue the OSAS assessment? Is the issue STAR? Did they take the test seriously? Not sure. But with that, you can still see there is a slight correlation because as students are scoring higher in terms of the percentile, they are scoring higher as far as the OSAS is concerned, generally speaking. So there's a little bit of a correlation, but it's nowhere near as strong as that.
If they didn't take one or the other,
There's no data. Yeah, you'd have, in the way the correlation, you wouldn't have a data plot point if you didn't take both assessments. That's what I'd want to see. That's pretty nice.
The further you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas this one, all of this right here, let's see if I can make this work. All of this right here in this kind of quadrant, I'm really curious about. Because what I want to see is I want to see a nice line that's linear going from low to high. So this is a lot of noise that I don't know what's going on. And I'd like to know.
Those two separate tests, ELA.
Oh, good question. Yeah, so the state reading test or the state language arts test has both a language arts section, which incorporates both writing and reading. And it also has a reading component that's pulled out as far as OSAS is concerned. But you can see that the graphs are very similar, whether I'm looking at either just the reading subscore or looking at the whole language arts that incorporates reading and writing together. There's not much of a difference in terms of that correlation.
Thank you.
So let's start with the STAR reading first. This is comparing by and large to the state benchmark. What that means is STAR gives us the ability to compare students either to a state benchmark. So are they meeting a certain standard? Or it gives us the ability to compare to a national standard, which simply asks the question, how are people doing relative to whoever's sitting next to them? So it's not standards based on the national level. It's just asking on average, how are people doing? And so you'll see that in just a moment. The data that we're gonna look at though is that state benchmark, like how are we doing relative to what the state standards are in that particular grade? So with this, I wanted to just do a quick comparison of STAR to iReady. You know that they're measuring similar outcomes. And what I want to see here, the iReady scores from middle school in the fall of 2022 are on the left, and the STAR scores from the fall of 2024. And to me, I don't want to make a big deal about, hey, there's less green, that's good, as opposed to iReady. They're two different assessments. So I don't want to make too much of a comparison. What I do see is that I see more students that aren't meeting grade level in both iReady and STAR. And I see a much smaller group of students at the very top who are at or above grade level. And so what that tells me in terms of a diagnostic result is these are measuring similar sorts of things. Even though the greens and the blues and the reds are the same size, I wouldn't expect them to be. It's different students. We're coming off the pandemic in 2022. So there are differences in the measure, and that's something that's important to account. But they're measuring similar things. This one was interesting to me because the graph on the right stayed exactly the same. It didn't change. The graph. Oh, excellent. Assessment from STAR. So the graph on the left is actually asking the question, how do our students compare to everybody else who's taken the STAR assessment across the US? So when we look at the state benchmarks, we can see there is plenty of growth for our students in order to meet state benchmarks. What the graph on the left tells me is that a lot of our students, regardless of the state that they're living in, are below grade level standards. Or say definitely that large pink on the left, that's about 50% of our students are at or above the national average, which means if you put all of our students in a line, half of them are at that center mark or above, which means half of them are at that center mark or below. We're basically average as far as the nation is concerned, as far as our reading results go. Which says if we just compare ourselves to who's standing next to us, that's great, but whoever's standing next to us, whether we're in Oregon, Washington, Nevada, you name it, there are reading scores that are down across the nation. So that's why I want to stick with state benchmarks, because that's going to let us know how we're doing relative to the line we want to cross. So questions on those? I'm going to fly through these fairly quickly because this is just taking a look at breaking down how did our students do by grade level, and then also by ethnicity, race, by EML, and by special education status. And one of the things with this one, particularly grade 6, 7, or 8, the thing that jumped out to me is it's fairly consistent in terms of the needs of our students, regardless of grade level. So the box on the side, level 4, that kind of pink box, those are students that are above grade level. The blue box is level 3, students that are at grade level. Level 2 and level 1 are students that are below or well below grade level. The other piece that I think is encouraging with this, for those students in that purple box, about 25% of our students, with just some additional support taking place inside of a classroom setting. What STAR predicts is that those students will be able to make it to state benchmark scores or passing state benchmark by the time spring rolls around. The other thing to know is that a predicted score isn't destiny, right? And STAR emphasizes that over and over again. So this is based on how the students scored in the fall. This is actually predicting what they think our scores will be in the springtime. So that's an important thing to remember. It's not looking at their score right now, it's saying where they were based on typical growth and those sorts of things. Here's where we predict they could be.
Is that a comparison that you expect to use? This is what started off would be, and this is where we actually ended up.
We would, when spring rolls around, for sure. So taking a look at what we had here, right? That's something I'm very curious about, like how accurate is STAR? And I'm also curious for those students that are in that kind of purple zone who are close, or what STAR predicts is close to being a benchmark. I'm curious how we're doing in terms of helping those students actually gain the skills they need to grow at perhaps even a faster rate than what the typical growth would be. One thing that emphasis with STAR is on growth. How do we help students grow and meet the outcomes that we have? The other graphs, this was by ethnicity. This is mirroring what our state data tells us from OSAS. We have an achievement gap between students that are white and our BIPOC students, which makes me think about how is our system serving the students and how can we change that outcome. The other interesting piece, as I was working with some of our principals with this data, is I said it's really interesting that regardless of the ethnic group or racial group that the students are part of, that purple box remains about 25%, regardless of who the students are. And that was an intriguing aha or finding, which is similar to where we were right here. When you take a look at SPED versus non-SPED, it's a little small, but yes means they are in SPED. That's on the left. No means they're not in SPED. And the gap that we're seeing predicted outcomes in the spring based on fall results is exactly what we're seeing in the past American OSAS data. And the same thing is true with our EML students as well. One of the things that's interesting with this one, so EML, no, is on the far left. Yes, those are students that are currently in an EML class receiving services. Monitored are students that are exited from receiving services on a daily basis, but we still monitor and check and see if they're growing as far as the state is concerned. What's interesting to me with this is our data for students that are no longer getting daily services in EML, and for those that are post-monitored, your data is very similar to those that have not been in an email program, which tells you that their learning is robust. And so we have work to do as far as our email students are concerned. That's that large green column there that says yes. And that's also the reason that we're targeting school improvement. And so some of the things that we're doing specifically around reading with EMLs. So Blake, you talked about phonics routines. Even in our 6th grade, this is our 2nd year doing some phonics routines in our language arts classes at the 6th grade level. Here's what we found with our DIBELS data off 5th grade. Our students can read. There isn't any issue with that. But what we have found is that they're reading really, really slow. So it takes them a long time to process words. So as they're reading, if you gave them a passage, they can tell you what every word was in the passage. But it takes them so long to get through a sentence that by the time they get to the end of the sentence, they forgot what the start of the sentence said. And so what we're doing with the phonics is trying to help that reading become more automatic with our students, knowing that that's going to be a skill that will help them regardless of content area. Also, we've been partnering with our email department this year, and we have email coaches that were hired with our targeted school improvement dollars. And they're working with all of our content area teams at the middle school level, doing co-teaching strategies, meeting with small groups, and even having the ELD teacher join the cohorts, talking about how we can embed strategies for our email students into the general ed content. So students, whether they're in an email classroom or the general ed classroom, are getting supports. Just like Myra talked about, we know that the supports that are good for emails are good for all our students, all the way across the board.
It's gonna be interesting to see what those bars look like when DLI rolls up to.
Apps.
100%. Also, site specifically, we also have some coaching support at Clear Creek, trying to build teacher capacity around ESOL. That's for speakers of other languages. And then also Dexter McCarty has their newcomers group for students that are brand new to the US. And so working with them specifically from ways to support their learning and help them acclimate to the US system. You'll see this slide when it comes up again after math. It will look very similar because the email coaches are working across language arts, science, social studies, math, etc. Questions, Sean? Well, I think you're about that, so I wanted to talk about just in case. For math, you'll see that the story is very similar with, I guess, the asterisk. We have more work to do in math by and large. You can see again, iReady is on the left, STAR is on the right, comparing 2022 to 2024. This one is much more similar in terms of the widths of bar colors that you can see here, which again tells me that iReady and STAR are making similar sorts of outcomes. The number of students that are well below grade level in math is significantly more. For the reading is about 45%, whereas for math it's about 65%. So a significant difference in terms of that outcome. Once again, looking at our state benchmark that's there on the right to the national benchmark, whereas in reading, we're about average, in math we're below the national average. Only about 40% of our students are at or above the national average. Kind of large pink, it says 37%. So what that tells me is with reading, we're on average with our peers across the US. With math, we are not. With my takeaway from this.
Do you have any indication that the statewide issue might get students below their national peers, or is it?
That's a good question. I haven't looked at the national data or the statewide data for Oregon. I can easily pull it up and have it next time to see if Oregon is across or below.
Historically, our math scores on OSAS are lower than our reading scores.
Yes, traditionally so. By about 20%.
Yeah, as a student.
Significant trend. I mean, if we were at all reflective of other districts in Oregon, ODE should be on fire with this, because obviously we're doing something different.
And that's,
Not good.
well, this is partly the reason why at the middle school level, we've adopted middle school math. Because doing math in the same before, it's given us these outcomes that we see here. And so taking the recommendations of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, bringing in more discourse, bringing in more dialogue, doing more deep understanding of mathematical concepts, less kind of rote and drill sorts of things, but helping students understand the connection between concepts in math is the direction that we're going. And so one of the things I'm curious about is to what extent will that also have an impact on our students' ability to demonstrate math skills? These are going to be fairly similar to what we've seen before. The only difference is the green bar is going to be higher. Again, predicted scores are fairly consistent across grade levels. In this case, that purple bar for reading was about 25%. We're just right there, slightly below grade level. For math, it's only about 20%. So once again, that green bar, in terms of what STAR predicts, well below grade level is a greater number of students. Same sort of pattern that you see in reading is similar here. Again, the green bars are simply taller. Same gap, though we're talking special ed. And that same pattern holds true with our EML students, where our post-monitored and our monitored students are having outcomes or predicted outcomes that are very similar to our students that are no longer or that never were in the EML program. So once again, we have work to do to support our EML students as far as the system is concerned. So as far as the data goes, this isn't I think an assessment of our students necessarily. To me, I see it as an assessment of the system, serving our kids in ways we can improve that work. Like I said, you've seen this slide before. We're doing the same sorts of things with math that we're doing. Small groups, our email coaches are working with all of our middle schools for coaching support to embed strategies into classes that are consistent. And then with that, the other pieces that we're doing, because STAR is new for us, we spent some time already in September and October doing an initial dive into what is the data, how do we access it, what does it mean. In January, we spent some time on the growth measure component of STAR and unpacking how to use a growth measure to impact our instruction. And then finally, in March, doing some more work with STAR around small group instructional practices and how you can use the data to inform those pieces. The other piece that we're doing with our coaches, we've got a professional, we meet on a monthly basis, and our professional learning is around how do we embed strategies that target both our EML and our special ed students into all of our coaching professional learning opportunities that we offer to our teachers. So as an example, we had a learning opportunity in October where we had middle school and high school together, and our email coaches had us embed sentence structures and sentence frames into all of our professional learning and model what does it look like to have sentence structures and sentence frames in math or in science, in social studies. And sentence frames are one of those strategies where you give students a part of the sentence. So instead of giving them the entire sentence, you give them piece or part, and they can kind of fill in the blanks, so to speak. And so our coaches are able to model that with their email coaches across the content areas. I've gone through pretty quickly because I was trying to be conscious of the time. Any questions?
When would we get another update of this nature?
I think the board retreat in February. We will do mid-year assessments until January. We should be ready to go for the retreat.
How are parents able to access the iReady or STAR assessments for their students?
So that's one of the questions we've asked STAR. STAR actually has individual student reports that we can print up and send home. Because it's so new, our teachers are still in the process of trying to figure out how do you access them? Do we want to print them? Can we send them home electronically? So the answer is yes, but our teachers are still trying to figure out how do we do that in an efficient way.
And there's a parent report memory as well. We sent out. For staff, teachers do.
Fall teacher conferences, so.
Yes, it is on the horizon for us. And with those, similar to iReady, it talks about here's some of your strengths that your students demonstrated. Here's some things that you may want to work with your student at home, or some ideas that you might find helpful in working with your child. Right.
All right. I realize we have two more presentations. I'm gonna say a 10-minute break. I need to stand up and shake my brain.
Got a data brain?
I do. Yeah, a little data brain. morning to bars. We're back. Welcome, Gresham-Barlow Board of Education, November 20th work session. Next up is presentation transformative social emotional learning. Carly.
Hi. I'm gonna be like double sorry. My only little note from here.
Sorry, that was still on things.
Oh, look at that. Right, oh, see, here's. Where do I click? Okay. Hello, good evening. So I am going to be sharing a little bit about transformative social emotional learning. And these are kind of our three big objectives. Understand ODE's requirements for transformative SEL. Understand our plan and next steps. And then I don't know that we'll have time, but I'll give you a little tool in the slide deck in case you want to go practice at home. So first things are that I wanted to highlight where this fits into the board conditions. So really social emotional learning, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is another way to say workforce ready skills, soft skills, skills necessary for being a successful adult out in the world. Those are all different ways of talking about social emotional learning. And they address safety. They also address belonging. I added achievement down there because once we start looking at the standards, you will start to see the language that is in your board conditions threaded throughout social emotional learning. So our framework in our district is to focus on building capacity, or Oregon's, not ours, is to focus on building capacity for strengthening equity-focused school cultures, support student well-being. See if it's gonna come out here. Intentional focus on social and emotional elements of learning and teaching. So when Heidi and Tim were here, we were talking about teaching and learning, and I think, I don't know, somebody said, is this just social emotional learning, right? Like, why is there a gap? And I think part of it is that when kids have a sense of belonging, when they're connected to school, when they're connected to the content and have a sense of agency, you start to see them demonstrate these other academic skills and growth. And so it's not a precursor for learning, but it is definitely something that supports engagement in content. It's a transformative approach in that it teaches the whole child versus just a set of skills, builds on their strengths, perspectives, and contributions, guides the interactions and relationships between students and adults, and we're going to talk a little bit about adults, and equips students with skills needed for college, career, and life, and I kind of touched on that. So this is the difference between social emotional learning and transformative SEL. So historically, social emotional learning, some of us have taught it, there's skills taught in single class or grade. A counselor comes in and says, this is how you're nice to your friends, right? What we're talking about is how are they integrated into all contexts? So it's not just a lesson, but that teachers and students have a better understanding of how to be, like, work with one another, how to acknowledge what's going on and work through that. That emotions are really thought of as like, this is your issue, you're angry, this is the thing I have to manage with the individual student, versus why are you angry? What's the context in which you're angry? And then how do we understand the environment as it impacts your behavior versus your personal self-management? It's not that you're not helping students develop personal self-management, but the adults and the kids themselves start to understand how the environment that they're sitting in, how they're feeling is impacting that behavior. It also focuses on emotion as an individual choice versus related to how students are experiencing their interactions with peers. And then students as recipients of learning, as in they're just sitting there getting taught versus students engaging with their own sense of agency, belonging, and connection. And those are many of the same core characteristics that are precursors to professional learning skills, to professional skills. For us to be adults, we have to have a sense of agency, even if, depending on what our jobs are. To be adults, we have to know that we belong in that workforce, or oftentimes we don't stay. For us to have that sense of connection, then we tend to perform better in workplaces. So they're very strongly connected. This is the picture that the state has put together to describe 5 different characteristics of the framework, which is they talk about the conditions for learning and thriving, and you'll notice that yellow maps to the yellow over here. There are the guiding principles, which are kind of considered the roots. And there are 5 guiding principles: trauma-informed, strengths-based, community responsive, culturally responsive, and grounded in neuroscience, which is really interesting stuff when it comes back to things like iReady or STAR. Then we have the standards, which I'll talk about in a moment right here. That's all of this outcomes. Adult SEL is a huge part of this. You've all heard many times in board meetings about adults feeling like they're not being supported, like kids are dysregulated, like doesn't feel like an emotionally safe place for adults. This doesn't address all of that, so I wouldn't want it to oversell it, but having adults have a place to have the sense of well-being and connectedness with other adults within the school community, to feel a sense of belonging themselves, supports them in being able to support kids. And then the student transformative SEL. So that's the state framework. This is our timeline, which was last spring. We pulled together a planning team of about 60 folks. They spent 4 times, about half day each, unpacking the standards and really mapping out what we wanted to do in terms of implementation. Each one of those folks went back to their schools and they engaged in a series of conversations with students about social emotion, like how they feel in the schools. And we developed a common vision and mission. Part of the plan then is to implement this year adult transformative SEL professional development. So we already launched one of those in August. Right now, our schools are working with staff in staff meetings on the second of the series. And then we are also concurrently going through a curriculum adoption with our health adoption, so that because a lot of the standards are the same. And so we're adopting a SEL curriculum that will be rolled out next year, K-12, and it will probably be by grade band. It's not necessarily the same curriculum, K-12. And then we will review the plan and adjust. We will have ongoing professional development while we implement the curriculum, and we will go from there.
Will this be in health classes then, or is this outside of health, like in an advisory?
So in elementary, it will be, there's a block of time, twice a week. I wish Heidi were here. I'd have to look at the elementary schedule, but there's during their soft start and circle time, in elementary. In middle and high school, it's advisory and some complementary work in health where the standards already overlap. And that's why we're meeting with health teachers to find out where the standards already overlap. And then at high school, similarly, but because they only have to have 1 full credit of health throughout their 4 years, it's a slightly different, it'll probably be much more integrated. They may not, more like they'll pull lessons within their other content areas. In the high school, it becomes much more about supporting the adults and integrating it into content. But we also have advisory as a component of that.
So the CEL-PD for teachers, is that how to support students with CEL? Or is it spelled for them?
It's for
Or
them, but it's for them.
So we're gonna have therapy dogs again.
Well, I mean, it's, if you're mama, but I mean, everyone's up, but that'd be great. It's really also just about, one of the things we've heard from a lot of adults in the planning was that they keep hearing, you need to self-regulate. Adults kept hearing, you need to self-manage. And they're like, we don't have the tools to do that. You're telling me to do something that I've never been taught. I didn't go to be a science teacher to learn that. I need help with that.
But also, how do they regulate themselves?
Exactly, that's what I'm saying, is that they were saying that they felt like they were being told to regulate themselves.
Oh, I thought that they were being asked to regulate kids.
No, they're being told to regulate themselves and they needed support with that. Or they're being told to manage kids and they hadn't been given the proper support. And either way, you need it both. In order for you, what we know from neuroscience is that if you can't, I mean, and anybody who's gotten frustrated with their own child knows that if you can't regulate yourself, the whole thing escalates. Right? I mean, I can say that from personal experience. And so I think that the more adults can have self-awareness, the better they are, and then the better our kids are. Okay. Okay, so in the plan, we created a two-pager. One is in Spanish and the other is in English. We wrote our mission and vision. It was a very broad representation of staff. We had classified, we had custodial, we had folks from tech, we had classroom teachers and counselors and administrators, and we had a lot of representation from our DLI programs. And what we did was went through a process of creating some mission and vision. And we decided to start it in Spanish because oftentimes things, especially in the emotional realm, don't translate from English to Spanish. So we decided to go from Spanish to English and see how that would work. So we actually wrote a lot of this in Spanish first, and then we translated it into English, especially the mission and vision. And so the mission, we said, is let's transform our systems and practices through social emotional learning to uplift all voices and create more inclusive schools. And then all members of the community, GBSD community, will experience a culturally relevant, equity-centered climate that celebrates the diversity of all individuals and fosters connection and well-being. So then you can kind of see this is a similar representation to what I showed you on that earlier slide. So let me get to the standards. So these are the standards for SEL. There are 5 of them. And in front of you, you have both I just showed you the plan. It's also in the slide deck. And then these are the 5 standards. So self-awareness and identity, self-management and agency, social awareness and belonging, relationship skills and collaborative problem solving, and responsible decision-making and curiosity. I just want you to take like 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and in your own work context, what of these skills, and if you've ever supervised somebody or hired somebody or started something, what of these skills would you like to see adults have? Not in schools, but in the workforce.
Oh.
Which ones do you feel like for you personally, which ones do you feel like, if you could take a minute, like, wow, I wish, you don't have to say this, but gosh, I wish that when I were in school, we would have been taught this, or maybe I wouldn't have been, suspended so many times, or I wish my kid knew blah, blah, blah. So I'm trying to really have you personalize it. Think about putting yourself, either in your work context or your personal life, into these standards and see if you can find yourself. And then I'm gonna show you a quick video, hopefully it works. That works.
Ooh, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you-
It's I get really mad when my brother hits me a lot. I don't like it when you don't want to play with me. When I'm mad, my brain can get a headache and it can start hurting. Your blood keeps pumping because you're like really mad. And you start to get sweaty because you're getting really, really mad. Then when you start getting really mad, you turn red when your body can't really control yourself. That just your body. I just get out of control. It's kind of like if you had a jar and then the jar would be your brain and then you put it in the jar and that would be your. If you shook up the jar and the glitter went everywhere, that would be how your mind works. And it's like spinning around and then you don't know anything to think. And you sometimes punch stuff and people when you don't really mean it. When I get angry, I feel it in my heart. I really don't like when I get. The amygdala doesn't react, but the prefrontal cortex tries to keep it down. When I like feel like I want to, get really angry and yeah, I just like sometimes, take deep. First, we find a place we can be alone and find some way to relax and calm down. When I need to calm down, I take breaths. I breathe in through my nose. Sometimes I close my eyes or just take deep breaths. It's like it's calming down, it's like not like moving. It's like slowing down and then it stops. The heart pumps slow and then it goes into your brain. It's like all the sparkles are at the bottom of your brain. My brain like slows down and then like I feel more calm and then I'm like ready to speak to that person.
So.
I get really mad when my brother hits me. I don't like it when
And just, you can go to the next one. And thank you. So before we read those, what standard or standards, when you think back to it, did you notice? And did you have any ahas about the connection of teaching and learning and SEL? So what we heard when we made the plan is that what students told us is they want staff and teachers to like being here. And we want them to get to know us. They also told us that they're tired and anxious. I just heard something from a professor at a university today talking about even though academically they're doing strong, sometimes they're also really struggling. And the professor was like, so what's the point if they're doing well, but they're not doing well? We want to feel excited, less worried, and like we belong. Want to be a part of informing SEL. These were just some of the voices that we heard. last spring and that we're continuing to talk to. One of the other things, and this kind of gets to your point, Myra, is that teacher and staff emotional well-being is highly correlated with student performance. So many studies suggest that when teachers and staff feel connected to one another, supported for their own health and wellness, and are able to have flexibility when possible, they tend to feel better and students tend to have better academic and social outcomes. So on the next slide, there are a lot of activities that we've done with our own staff to support SEL. And then we will be repeating some of these activities. I'm not going to go through them, but each one of those links is a link to a YouTube video. I think it should be in the slide deck on the, hopefully the links work, the links work.
Yeah.
And those links are opportunities for you to kind of, and what we've done is have our staff and administrators be able to go on those links and then do a series of questions so that they can practice right along with the students. One of the questions that we ask, and it's also in the slide deck, is think about yourself as a child. How would you have demonstrated the skill that you see when you watch that video? How did you learn this skill as you got older? You haven't learned it. What are the barriers? Do you have this skill as an adult? What support might you need to develop the skill for yourself? And so those are all questions that we asked our administrators this summer, and we asked our administrators to take back with their SEL teams in the schools to ask their staff. And the goal of that is so that everyone develops a stronger understanding of how it might actually look in the classroom with kids. We will continue to practice these things. It's not one and done, like all of us are works in progress. And as we adopt the curriculum by grade band, we will be working with our adults again and how does this look in their classrooms, whether they're integrating it into their curriculum or whether it is being taught as more explicit lessons in something like advisory. So this is our overall plan. I shared with you the mission and vision. Right now, we're working with adult SEL by focusing, a lot of the questions we had was on escalation and de-escalation and co-regulation. So that video I showed you is very much focused on all of us understanding what's happening with brain neuroscience, and then how do we address that? And also kind of tapping into that empathy muscle. Modeling and naming T-cell throughout our meetings and our professional development. And then there's also a staff wellness committee that has a grant to offer mini grants in buildings. Every building has a wellness coordinator. And then we have student transformative SEL, which is the curriculum adoption, engaging with the students and helping with some of the adult professional development. And also making sure that students are a part of informing which curriculum we adopt by grade band. And that is the end of my presentation. It is something that we are working on in multiple fronts, and so it's not nearly as clear as like, this is your math block, you know, this is your science block. It's definitely more of a shift in not what we're doing, but how we do it.
How is it being received by staff? And I'm particularly asking about secondary, right? We've been hearing a lot about how they feel unsafe and how kids get rewarded when they're sent to the office. They're just sent right back with no consequences. And you know, everything that we've been hearing for this. So how, what specific PD are teachers receiving, and then how are they being open to it?
It's a great
Like,
question.
what does it look like right now in schools?
So part of this was part of a PD in August. I heard I wasn't at all of them, because one of the other things is we want students and staff who are in the schools to be talking about it more openly. I heard that it went pretty well. People are in theory excited about the idea. Like Gresham High School didn't do their fall one yet. So I don't know if that's coming like in December is something I have to check in with. I have a check in with all the admin this coming week and then right after right after Thanksgiving break. To find out kind of how it's going. I would say it varies by school. It's been really good to have the breadth of staff involved, because one of the biggest cautions and concerns was that it would sound too patronizing, right, to staff. You just need to take better care of yourself, right? And so that tone is not the intention of this. It's really to try to lean into the discomfort, honestly, as leaders of deeply listening to how our staff are feeling, and then working with them to build their skills so that they can support our kids. And kind of acknowledging, maybe we have been, we can't dismiss that, right? So I do think the staff that have been involved in this conversation, I am hearing them appreciate the authenticity of the way we're sharing this. It's not something that you can check a box. It is not a technical tool. And I think if we tried, the state, when they passed it, a lot of districts adopted a curriculum and just rolled it out, very technical, teach that. We took a completely different approach, which was we weren't just gonna roll out a tool to teachers to teach kids. We really wanted to slow it down enough so that we had staff deeply involved. And I felt strongly that this has to feel like an authentic engagement and not an adaptive process, not something we're just doing to people, kids or staff, because then it's not helpful for kids.
And it's required, right? So
Yeah.
it's really easy for it to be a checkbox, and it's too important for us to let it be a checkbox.
So, with that, in terms of the purpose for it, why the ODE rolled it out is, what would you say in a 30-second, what was their purpose? What were they hoping to gain?
By fostering greater student connection and belonging, we will see better academic outcomes and higher engagement.
Okay, so that's the academic and higher engagement. Does it correlate at all to MTSS? And when kids are feeling better, they will move out of that tier and into something.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, we know there's a ton that it is a tier one. It is fundamentally, thank you for bringing in MTSS. It is fundamentally a tier one system level way to address student engagement and belonging.
One's work.
That brings down behavior.
Everybody.
One is for everybody, universal. Yeah.
But as that, it will be interesting, let me see, I had 2 points. As it is rolled out to tier one kids, it's gonna be rolled out universally, so it has to affect tier 2 and tier 3.
Well,
kids.
all kids get tier one.
Right. Right,
Including tier 2 and tier 3.
right. So it'll just be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Some
how,
kids may not need additional support at tier 2 because we have strong tier 1.
Yeah.
you would hope that it, impacts that positively. And I would ask that, I won't be here to see it roll out, but I would be interested in seeing the correlation of that, particularly because you're doing it differently than a lot of other districts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that by having our adults feel really supported, and like they are equipped and they have the academic tools, right, to teach reading, that the combination will support student learning.
The other question is with the PD and all the other things we have our teachers doing, how much time
It's
and
great.
effort is this
Yeah.
particular piece taking?
Yeah.
And is it taking, how much is it taking away from academics?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to the extent that that's our professional development, we have 4 that we're planning and working with schools to integrate them during their regular PD, not at the district level, but really at the school level, and sort of integrate it into their other content that they have planned. So that we're also modeling, like, one of the elements was, name, SEL in the context of your math professional development. So math is one of those, we have high failure rates, right? Well, how we teach, not just what we teach, really make a difference in terms of our math scores. And so talking about with teachers, I have this group of kids who hates math. Let's dig into that a little bit. Is it what you're teaching or is it how you're teaching? Not as a criticism, but let's figure out why they're hating it and what can we do to support that element of it and see where it goes. It's not a science, right? I mean, it's a science and it's an art, which is what teaching is too, but it's trying to really equip our educators with more tools to meet the kids who we have now in our buildings.
And the only other, comment, I guess, is how many teachers will check the box with PD and not
I mean, that's always,
engage it?
yeah.
And then how do you, as administration, keep your finger on the pulse of those teachers? Because your best avenue of getting them all on board is to show that it makes significant
Yeah.
difference.
And I do think that's where our coaches and our teachers on special assignment who are in the classroom with them and who are actually really pivotal in helping this, like all of our staff who are engaged in this. Me doing that, I mean, I'm just a talking head, right? But what matters is the people in the buildings feeling like it's authentic. That's whatever.
You said it's a tier 1 MTSS intervention.
I would say it's not an intervention, but a tier 1 UPS.
Yeah.
Yeah, something that supports.
Because, I mean, you're, you know, you're where the rubber meets the road.
Mhm.
But having been through the last 6 months, my found concern will be that people are coming with significant, we don't have a caseload.
Yeah.
And then we roll this in.
Yeah.
Look at this great corporate,
Yeah,
you know, and so I value how it's being, and I'm glad we didn't just roll up. I just could see how it could be perceived as kind of disingenuous. And I know that's nobody's intention. Yeah. I also think, and I don't know, I sit into or and it's not diving into individual students, but I would say, you know, the video was sweet and valuable for, I don't know what that number is anymore. I would have said 95% of people. And having been through the journey that my family's been on, at least for the last 8 years, I know that every kiddo that I had in my home wanted those skills, but couldn't chemically or because the hand they were dealt biologically, decisions outside of themselves. And I am curious how teaching like this interfaces with something of an epidemic of substance related and, you know, impulse control related, you know, measures that are really driving kids from tier 1 to tier 2 who have to be in tier 1. I know I'm just trying to bring it more.
To your point, acknowledging that we are we are adding this ingredient into an already pot of stew. And that while we want at some point to take it over so that we have 90%, maybe we'll never get there. But without that acknowledgement of what we're trying to accomplish and that it may fall not short, but not where we'd like it to be, or it needs to be massaged into, you'll gain more credibility with the effort.
Yeah.
By acknowledging that and trying to, I don't know what that means in terms of implementation, but something, and maybe that's the input from the
Yeah.
people on the street doing it.
Well, and I do think just to kind of, I mean, to your point, like that nothing is a panacea for everything, right? Including equipping staff and kids with more SEL skills. That doesn't address kids who are neurologically or chemically impacted outside of their control. What it does do is those kids who are maybe triggered for that behavior, or who maybe haven't had opportunities to practice that, or are experiencing other senses of othering in their school community, and their only tool in their toolbox is to react out of anger or frustration or to shut down. I mean, sometimes it's not a big reaction, it's a shutdown reaction. The more we can help those kids to feel that sense of connection and belonging, it allows our staff to have more bandwidth to focus on the kids who do need more intensive, right? Because if 30 or 40% of your students are struggling, that's really tough. But if 5% are struggling, you have more bandwidth to focus on that 5 because the rest of them have been given more of the tools that they need. So that would be that's the goal. That's the goal with MTSS. But it's, yeah.
If you had to, because when you talk about 30 or 40, if you have fewer kids that need that 5%, you can focus more on the 5%. Where is the percentage of this focus compared to the academics? And I heard you say it's all interwoven and it's how you do the academic part, but that's always the question is how much attention do we need to do to get them ready to learn? But then how much time left do we have left to teach true academics? It's a
I think
balance.
it's about how you respond to the academics. I don't understand this math problem. Just try again. That's one way. Or, oh, wow, I'm sorry you don't understand. That's another way. Same question from the kid, different response from adult. You get different response from kid. You're still talking about math.
I think math's a really good example when you think about how you can have some just small language shifts that can make a big difference. Something that just sticks out to me because it's something I've done and now I feel terrible about, right? Sometimes as teachers, we realize and learn something new and it's like, gosh, why did I do that so many years? So I've always thought of myself as a math person. I'm a math person. I'm good at math. I'm better at math than John Cook. I'm a math person, right? But that also sends the message that there are people that are not math people. And so by talking about being a math person, because that's something that comes naturally to me, that means that there's other people that may not feel that way, or if they're struggling with math, think, well, I'm just not a math person. So I'm not, they kind of limit themselves in terms of how they pursue, some of those things that are struggling or challenging for them. So that's an example for me of how we start to think really intentionally about how we shift some of our language so that we don't have that emotional shutdown for kids when they are struggling. The struggle is good. Productive struggle is where you learn. But if you shut down in that moment because you're not a math person and Tracy is, those are things that we can impact.
And that is an example of like agency, right? And the student has a sense of agency. And then the whole behavior thing is not become as big of an issue because they have a sense of agency in their learning.
So I'm on the questions to consider Black, and it's very interesting to think about it. And one of the things is we're doing it in school, doing it with our staff, we're doing it with our students. And then a little bit to Blake's comment, the students home life or where they started their home, where their impact is, if they're returning to that, if that's still there, are we doing anything that also helps the parents as well? Because I'm looking at some of these things and I didn't learn this, I learned a lot of coping skills, but I didn't necessarily learn this kind of stuff. And so how do you break that chain, I guess? And how do you do that in a way that's respectful, which the language that you're using is, that you're not saying you're wrong, but there's a different way of doing it, or showing the example of, we did this and it helped your child with math. I know, but it's, if we only keep it to the school, then the student has far more impact and far more things that are happening to them outside of school. How are we helping the student to impact that, which means bringing the families?
That's really, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe that's your three. Yeah. No, I know, I think that's a really good question. I mean, and I do think, actually, a little plug on December 11th, kind of to Blake's point. Before all of this, we're also leading work to educate parents about substance use. And I do think, like when you're in education, you're planting seeds, you're not fixing problem in that moment, right? And so some of it is, where do we collectively spend our time that we have to support parents? And it is a full system job done. We hear from Don, and student engagement and family engagement is a huge part of that work too. And it never ends. And, there are multiple facets to it. So, yeah, good point, and more to come.
Yeah, and just to, I don't think anybody was saying this, but like, what I'm, this is when the Surgeon General had to put cigarette cartons, that it was bad.
Yeah.
It's like against smoke. And so we had instruction in the classroom against smoke. And I don't remember community blowback, maybe there was, and I don't think retrospectively, anybody here is thinking, gosh, we really did that. We really judged Tom. I don't know. I hope we wouldn't, because secondhand smoke is dangerous for people. So we said it. And I think the same way we're like super reticent to say things about substance use, even under substance use. We're really reticent to say anything about in utero substance use. We're really reticent to say anything about screen time, the effects of child's development. Really reticent to say anything about the importance of strong structures and sleep habits, that not all environments that we subject our children to are equal. And I would just because you're high-level professional educators, please don't ever let language enter that says that's judgmental to inform families what is healthy for their children.
Yeah.
You know that I'm a huge parent, right? So this is. That can be both.
Yeah.
Any other questions? A lot of reflection. Question.
I appreciate this work. I think it's
Yeah.
very needed. And hopefully, and I also agree that you can't make it technical. Can't, because it has to be hard work. Hopefully teachers.
Yeah, and we have to work hard to build the trust with our teachers so that they do feel like this is authentic work, right? And it isn't
Yeah,
be a thou shalt. This is truly like, we chose this career for a reason. How do we support you in staying in this?
Yeah, and then it's good for them too. I mean, I mentioned at the last board meeting, like, it's okay to say, hey, today we're not gonna talk about it. Let's talk about something's going on. Let's talk about what's going on. It's just not a circle. Like, because we're never gonna get through all these standards anyway. We're not. I never have. In the 10 years I was in the classroom, I never covered all the standards. I want to put somebody else. And if they haven't, I'm like, oh, respect. But I want to get to know my kids. I want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I'm nosy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Relation, no, thank you.
All right. So I'm sure we're gonna hear more. And
Happy to share.
are we, okay, so we'll move it on to our next and last. Michelle Cook, John Cook, and Don Hoy Jackson.
All right. So we just thought it would be great to have you all here. You asked for this, you know, what's going on with the disciplinary handbook? How is it rolling out? We're gonna do this in 3 parts. The first, is not on the screen, but the first is how we roll this out to staff and what we've done so far and kind of our plan for the rest of the year. The second piece is how we plan to roll this out to families. And what we've already done, but how we intend to go deeper, and then how we are going to share it with students and students of different ages. So this, I'm just gonna keep talking. You're good.
Do you want to, oh, do you have it on your?
Yeah, I have it on here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just tell us what slide to go to.
You're so good. So this aligns with your all conditions in several ways. I wanted to check all of them. But I checked safety, pretty obviously, and belonging. I just did a long conversation at East Gresham this week. That was a facilitated conversation with high school students and middle school students coming in to mentor our 5th graders at East Gresham. And we talked about what their definitions and examples of safety, what their definitions of belonging were. Then one kid said it really beautifully. He's like, you cannot belong without being safe, and you cannot feel safe without truly belonging. And so those 2 intersections for this work, deep and came out of a 5th grader's mouth in a really beautiful. Can I move this? Okay. Thank you. So this is what we've done with staff. Some of this is going to be reviewed for all of you. I'm just gonna keep talking, and then Michelle and John, feel free to jump in. In August, we shared the disciplinary handbook with all of our staff. It was published on our website. There was a lot of work that happened with Michelle's team that she works with. You want to talk a little bit about that?
So, in August, we always pull together the PBIS teams from every school. It's required, administrators are there. And so, where this new handbook interfaces with, PBIS is really when it comes to what do we do when we start to see behaviors? What's the structural pieces? And it really gets into a lot of the technical in terms of, there's some newer definitions. We have forms that we use to document that. There's in workflow where when it gets reported to the office, what happens, all those things. And there's a different menu of responses for, it used to be that there was, 2 levels and now there's like 5. So it's a little bit broader. So there were some changes that staff needed to know as we implemented this. And so through the PBIS teams, we developed a nice flow chart that would help people see the difference between, what's a level 1, level 2, and level 3. And, at the building level, if I'm on the playground and I see this sort of behavior, what's my response? And we did a lot of that in depth because we're trying to bring people into calibration so that whether or not this is a minor incident or a major incident isn't based on who watched it happen, because that's not where you're getting the good evidence base. So that's what the PBIS teams, we gave them some tools and some activities to be able to take back to their staff and really share, here's some of the philosophy, here's some of the changes. And as we move forward, you'll begin to see these. So that was the pre-work done to help the staff kind of get ready for that. And this is not a one and done thing. This is, we already have next activities planned and some other things. That'll happen in August. And then there was time during in-service week where the teams, had time to, in front of their full staff to do
And they were able to take that work that's presented by their PBIS team, the positive behavioral and intervention support teams, to look at more in-depth handbook, really kind of looking at the process for developing the handbook, which we went over with all of you last spring. And then really getting into rights and responsibilities of our families, our students, and the levels of response. And I'm just going to spend a little time reviewing because it was a long time ago. Just a reminder that this handbook was not developed by any one group in Gresham, 27 members across the district in a lot of different roles and definitely from different groups, from both our teachers union, our classified union, and our administrative folks got together and developed this work. We worked with Ed Northwest.
You're right.
No, Ed Northwest, came in, somebody who works with that organization, who's developed, the safety and disciplinary handbooks across the region, came in and facilitated this work. And we looked at what has changed in terms of our disciplinary policy and legislation. We also looked at research and we developed our handbook. In August, we spent a lot of time looking at the rights and responsibilities. It feels like a really great way to start getting in depth into this work. We asked teams to look at things that were already happening at their school in terms of rights and responsibilities. And then 4 responsibilities that were listed and figure out what the rights are linked to. So every single right that was listed for students had to be held as a responsibility by either students, families, or staff. Every right that was listed for a staff member had to be held by families or students and also other staff members. And so it was this really holistic view of how those are held and connected. And then starting to look at what responsibilities are already an expectation in buildings and maybe which ones aren't. And that's kind of what Michelle was talking about, really aligning. We had a really old handbook, if you all remember, with things in there that were illegal and some of our buildings were not using them. And so there was all this unaligned practice that was happening across our buildings. And so really trying to look at rights and responsibilities is a way to get into what needs to happen to have us all do the same stuff. And then we got into looking at levels of disciplinary response, and that is level 1 are behaviors that are dealt with in the classroom. If I'm in a classroom with Sean, telling he's a dummy, right? Then the teacher can address me and talk about the harm that I've done to Sean, and Sean can talk to me and the teacher can deal with that. If I continue to do it, that might escalate up. But if I was in a classroom and I punched Myra in the face, that would immediately not be something that was dealt with in the classroom solely. It would be an office and perhaps working with the teacher in the classroom, right? So these levels of response, and then we have level 5, which are things that are dictated by law. This child brings a gun into a school, it's no longer any of our control. What happens after that is how we support that student is, but there is legislation that tells us, what needs to happen. So those are the continuum levels. And just to give you an example, this is level 1. One of the things that I really love about this disciplinary handbook is that each level not only has interventions and permissible sanctions, but it also has this piece of prevention strategies, things we can do to try and stop it again, or things we can try and use to have it happening at all in the first place, right? So we gave some examples of a level 1, students using, being too physical with each other in non-harmful ways. In first grade, it happened on the minute, students pushing each other or playing with each other's hair that's unwanted or taking somebody's book and shoving it into them, right? Those are the kind of things that happen all of the times. And there's a list of prevention strategies. We might need to call home for a family. We might need to have a conference. We might need to teach or coach social and emotional learning skills. Things don't change. Seat change, they're not rocket science most of the time. When there's 32 kindergartners.
Yeah.
So where are we going? That's what we did in August, and then mid-year, schools are gonna be going deeper into looking at levels of response and really looking at those prevention strategies and what is and can be done in schools. Strategies. And then in the spring, we're going to be looking at our matrix, which is what happens when. Okay? One of the things I love about our disciplinary handbook is that it gives a lot of decision-making to schools. And so it all depends. Our disciplinary handbook asks that we consider a lot of things when we're making decisions. One of those things that I already talked about is harm done. If I like this and I like, off you, it's really different than right? It also asks that we look at level of the student. If we have a student who doesn't understand consequence and cause and effect, for example, we might have a really different response to that student. It doesn't mean that the student didn't cause harm, but it means that our response needs to be different in terms of what we expect, how we reteach that student. So that's what's happening mid-year and in the spring. I just gave you a whole bunch of information and I'm gonna give you a little more, but I'm curious if you have questions.
I do, but it's in the weeds. Do we use recess detention in the elementary levels as an intervention, or is it at all frowned upon, or?
I think that.
It varies, no,
Yeah, I would say it varies, and there's a lot of conversation about that because we want kids to be physical, we want them to be active. And sometimes what that looks like is, when you come out for recess, we're gonna first have a conversation and talk through what happened yesterday so that we can make sure, so you do some teaching during that. And so then sometimes it's like, okay, we do this work, okay, now you have the last couple of minutes of your business. And so it is a strategy that is permissible in the handbook, and particularly at elementary level, you're really looking at the kiddos, because there are some kids, it's like, don't even try that, because then it's gonna make the rest of their day super, super hard. So that's where there's some flexibility in responses, but it really needs to focus on instruction.
We also have structured recess, which is controlling where students can be at recess. Like if they're causing harm at recess, and that's K5, that's real. Sometimes,
Yeah.
but it can be a smaller group that's working with somebody and that we can reteach and do that. And I just saw that in play at 2 of our schools last week. Structured recess happening. They're still getting exercise, but they can't be on the play structure, jumping or whatever the issue was.
Staff have been really creative at trying to find a way to balance setting limits and providing instruction and keeping kids safe. And for every single kiddo, how that combination comes together ends up with.
There's a section, I think it's page 9, considerations for determining the level of disciplinary response.
It's one of my favorite pages.
And it says, to whom and how and what degree of harm was done, including how individuals will be involved in any intervention. And I just wondered, can use this term, but it's true, the victim of whatever the situation, can they decline that? Are they given that opportunity?
Absolutely, yeah.
And to your point about the students that don't have the ability to assess consequences, what's the conversation about the, balancing the kids that want to feel safe or continue to learn in their classroom environment with that students need to be walked through the consequences? I mean, how do you keep, meet one, but still maintain the classroom environment?
So feel free to jump in, folks, but this is my response to that. I don't think it changes us keeping those students safe. So if a student is in one of our classes who doesn't understand cause and effect, right, for whatever reason, we're still going to have the same consequence or the same response in terms of keeping the kids that are being harmed by that student safe. What we do with that student would differ.
Well, and so that's a great point. I think my question was more the disruptability of the teaching environment. So, you know, one student is in the altercation, you know, two students involved, one student doesn't understand the consequences. But to the rest of the classroom, who's not even involved, but could be, you know, they don't get to keep learning because there's a situation that has to be dealt with. So how do you balance those needs? What does it look like?
What I would say is, I mean, every situation is different. It looks different based on age levels. What that looks like in seventh or eighth grade might look different than in a kindergarten classroom. And there's a certain amount, and classroom teachers are just masters at this at times where it's like, something's happened in the classroom and we need to talk about what happened, to have some like, let's come back together. One of our friends is struggling. What can we do to support our friend and get back on track learning? And so there's separate things happening because if there is an altercation between two kiddos, you've got that response that you're managing and you're figuring out how to, you know, minimize the disruption to the learning. And so all of that is balanced and it's based on how intense was the disruption? Was it something that required other staff to come and help, you know, the student that's really struggling? Is it something that the teacher can start to bring it down, have kids separate? Okay, you know, it all just depends on that intensity level and that's where those judgments come in. But it's always balancing that. And I think for every teacher, it's always, let's get back to learning. And sometimes you do need to talk about it. And, you know, and process it because, you know, and I think that's an opportunity to really bring in some of those SEL skills where sometimes people have big emotions and they have big feelings and how do we, you know, help support folks through that, but keep things moving forward too. So it's a dance.
It is a dance, and that's the whole point about the
Yeah.
balance, and I think that in the conversation, I mean, it's different with us, but whenever we talk about that, to always include your acknowledgement of needing to balance both, not just, you know, that it is one of the, of course you want to talk about it, but at some point, there has to be an evaluation of if a student is 3 times a week causing a situation that has to be talked about. I mean, that's just instructional time. That is the balance too.
And that's where your tiered systems of support come in, because if you've got a kiddo that we've had a major disruption 3 times during the week, we're starting to pull a staffing together to figure out what's happening for this student. You're looking at the root cause and you're like, what do we need to get in place so that we can bring the intensity on for both this student and make sure we keep the learning environment moving with minimal disruption.
My only other point, I don't want to belabor this, but it's the consistency across the district. I mean, every school is so different and the principal's different, the teachers are different, families are different in some regard.
Yeah.
And I understand that it's got to be individual, but I would be interested later to see at the end of an evaluation year, what was the consistency among schools? Because from, I mean, you're gonna hear that from parents. Well, wait, my friends are here and this happened, and then over here, this happened, and they were the same thing, and yet that, you know, so that's gonna be a concern, and I didn't see it in all the individuality. I didn't see how that, you know, was reached through the handbook. And so that's just a reflection.
Yeah, I mean, the matrix in the back is absolutely asking us to look at, and we clearly defined, I think, we spent a lot of time on definitions of different, like, what.
Different
The
behaviors.
words.
Infinite
behaviors.
Infinite behaviors.
And so it will be interesting to see. I'm not sure, I mean, this year is, the first year, the living document.
And we haven't spent time, because at the beginning of the year, we phase 1, middle of the year, be phase 2, we'll get one major, one.
Yeah.
More. Because it's more complex, a lot of the beginning of phase 5. So I believe that that's coming more towards January, February.
And I think also, a little bit kind of happy to what you were alluding to as well. Previously, because the handbook was so outdated, that schools were creating their own way of managing it on the fly. And with at least this having it be a consistent
Yeah.
and updated, and so it does, it's first year rollout, no question, and it's.
It's an observation.
And
Yeah.
parents
It's a
have
question I
always,
have too.
parents have always compared school to school and, you know, those
And
conversations.
you're not gonna get rid of it, but this, you know, we do have to do.
Make it
diligence to
consistent.
Respect teacher
And, yeah.
teacher to teacher.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna keep going and
Keep
then
going.
hold on to your. Wow.
Oh, no, we're gonna keep asking.
I wanna talk about the family and community piece, and then I'm gonna have questions at the end as well. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm looking at it's like, I wanna talk right now.
Not directly.
Okay, okay. I just wanna talk about families and community and students, because it's a huge piece, that I wanna make sure our families understand this document. So we published the disciplinary handbook on our website. How many families go on and look at our website? Very few. We've started to use it, in conversations with families and students as things come up, right? In October, we met with our district equity committee to talk about how should we review this with families and how should we roll it out to families, and they had a lot of suggestions. These are just a few. I'm not gonna read them all, but I really loved some of the suggestions. Sending it out to everybody in Parent Square and having it in different languages. We're currently having it translated into Russian and Spanish. That will be done by, John, I didn't tell you, I got an update. That will be done in the next couple of weeks. Having students and families sign the rights and responsibilities, and making videos in different languages was a really big, one. A summary and really making it accessible to our families who do not read and our families who cannot see was another thing that came up. Question and answer, and then just kind of summarizing. Our summary of the District Equity Committee for students was really to have it go out through 612 advisory, to make posters and videos, and then to rewrite our rights and responsibilities for students who are younger. So for example, our very first right for students, I love kids, they just call you on stuff. The very first right for students is learn in a safe, welcoming, and supportive environment that values diversity as an asset to everybody's learning. And the kids who are on the DEC, the students who are on the DEC are like, I don't even know what that means. You think a first and second grader is gonna even understand what that means? And so they have started to rewrite the responsibilities, rights and responsibilities, and we're gonna make posters that are in K-5 friendly language. With images. So I love that idea.
There's a skivity that emerges.
Skibbity.
So then we took those, that feedback to GBEA and OSEA. And we asked, where is staff right now in terms of understanding and using the handbook? And then we gave them the feedback from the District Equity Committee in terms of the recommendations and asked their feedback. This was a collectively developed work, and we don't want to now just put it in the hands of administrators who make all the decisions about it. Do you have anything to add about that?
We got that feedback last week. Michelle and I were in the meeting. It was our first meeting of the year with that, because we have a district level committee that looks at the broad scope of data. And we asked them those questions, or we asked them feedback. So I'll be surveying.
And
This
these,
relates to my question. This seems to be absent in what we call sanctions. I'm just wondering, is that is there a reason? I mean, I'm not like, is there a reason why you didn't use the word? I'm just wondering if there's professional language around this that.
There is professional language. You can take it if you want.
Are you sure, John? We all decided that permissible sanctions involved learning. and correcting behavior, but that there was an opportunity for learning. Consequences seem more like we're giving out the consequence without a shift. And so sanctions felt more to the committee that it was around actions we were taking to stop the behavior and shift behavior.
When you look at the matrix, the consequences are still. And we're actually up in incidents a bit this year by now. We just require. And stuff. So behaviors are being reported, they're being addressed. And things are happening to the kids with a focus on learning, so the kids can improve.
From a kid perspective, it's not, like, they could see it as.
Yeah, I would, yeah.
Yes.
I can speculate, yeah.
And in PBIS, we, it's like, when we put a sanction in place, I mean, there's a consequence, there's a boundary being set, this is not okay. And then let's teach you a new skill or something to help you shift the behavior. So you've got to have both of those so that students can understand where's the line and what do I need to do different.
And that, well, you finished. And we'll go. Sure.
So one of the things that the association says, you just need a lot more time to learn about and become more integrated across schools and across even within schools. And so I took that feedback to the DEC last week, and staff sat and said, how can we think outside the box? We have very little time with staff in terms of professional development. It seems really easy to just spend more time, but we also have to look at iReady, and we also have to look at instruction, and we also have to look at TSA. And we also, there's just so much that takes up that time. And so I'm going to share that feedback with you all next time, because we didn't get as far as we wanted to get with the DEC this time. But there were beautiful out of the box suggestions about how to integrate this into other things we're already doing. So the rollout for family and student is that we're going to develop resources that will be shared with families. And we're going to develop those resources in November and December. And then really early next year, one of the things I really love that you all talked about in terms of T-cell is, Blake, you said it. It's not bad to offer training for families about to blank. One of the things we heard in our safety summit really clearly from families is that they're like, can you please help us? Can you help us figure out how to deal with drugs and alcohol with our kids? How we can hold kids accountable for screen usage? How we can set boundaries for a lot of different things. And so we are going to work, and I know this is coming up, but work on recommendations from our safety summit and the recommendations that the district equity committee around how to roll out our handbook really aligned really beautifully. And so we are going to be doing some family nights around both those things. And then we're going to be distributing the summaries and starting to make videos and the posters that the students have made in February and March. I think that questions. Más preguntas.
I had two of them, and now you've made me some.
Just have a comment. I appreciate that teachers are gonna focus also on preventive strategies, not just on consequences.
Permissible sanction.
Thank you.
And it was a nice read. I did go through and read it just to see, and it had a flow to it that the previous one was kind of all over the place. You couldn't really tell. It was contradictory in some of the stuff. And it was, I don't know when they'll make a movie about it, but it's pretty. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was about to say, to your point, all of you. There's always that human inconsistency. Adults deal with behavior, who kids are, parents are, all of that will be here. But this is the first time ever that we've had both the base training on to be able to get more. Before this time, that was like possible, I hadn't thought about. Yeah.
No, if you have your question, you better ask.
No, I.
Just
Oh,
two
go ahead.
observations, one out of the DEC recommendations, the whole signing thing, I don't know what the solution is there, but I think that's very reflective of what I've heard, just how do we enhance accountability and shared ownership of this, of our challenges, that I heard at the safety summit.
That, and what was really interesting is that the students on our district equity committee were the ones who were the deepest about holding families accountable. They were deep. They were like, wait a minute, this isn't just teachers' role. Why are teachers completely responsible for student behavior? We need to hold families accountable. We need to make sure they know what they need to do at home so that whenever students come, I mean, that was from students, and we were like trying to roll it back a little, and the students were like, no.
Here's an irony for you. I like the accountability we need to do, and I like the idea of signing. The reason we went away from having a student rights and responsibility handbook signed was we got a possible track. We had so few people returning. There was constant teachers going after people. So if we can find an electronic system, if we can do that, but I agree with that. We need to do it.
Codes, and so students just, they were intense.
On the parent one, no, on the association response. I don't want to run afoul. When this was first rolled out, Sean asked a question about, does this get after some of the challenges that you've seen? And they said with the appropriate resources. Now that we're working our way through bargaining, it was not identified here. Some level of enhancement as a priority, or some level outside of what of the resources that are currently available. Is that?
It's a good observation, because that really didn't come up like. What did come up was there are individual times when they, for individual students, they may need more resources, and we target that, but it was really a passing comment. It wasn't a deep, it was much more about, see, they shifted from this pretty quickly into building safety committee minutes.
Yeah, they did. And they had interest in seeing majors versus minors because
They did.
there's been an uptick. We're actually documenting more minor behavior, so you would expect to see an uptick. So we're getting that disaggregated, that's coming.
And they wanted me to tweak the graphs a little bit about total
Yeah.
things. It really wasn't
Yeah.
substantive stuff.
And some of it was really around just spending more time.
Yeah.
And because there's so much to learn in August, and because of the structural changes with the forms changing, synergy had to be realigned. This is being implemented, and so the questions are starting to surface. And so you'll see like in a Monday news from a school, hey, want to clarify when this happens, the principals are doing. So there's just, as you use it, you find those, oh, this is different. I haven't had this one before. Now I'm a teacher, so there's all that learning that's happening, and that's where the ongoing conversations, calibration activities to keep the conversation going. This is going to be a continual role in continuing to get more and more aligned as people spend more time with it. It just takes time, and as things come up, and what's nice is we're feeling a lot better about the data we're giving.
And they did ask for, by consensus, to increase the length of our quarterly meetings. Because they also know that there's no way to go through what they thought they could. So we'll increase the time of those meetings, so we'll go into the evenings. We'll see what we get out of that, too, because there may be more questions that come.
An observation that I have, is other than the one school, where there's a lot of talk and everything else. Last year at Fort it was month after month, report after report, teachers really not happy with the student behaviors and disciplines and everything. And other than that one school, I haven't heard anything this school year.
When you look at, rural practice, too deep in here. Last year I did about 7 times through the year, consistently keeping track. And this year, I've been doing it monthly, and I've continued to do it monthly. And I had the graph up here, just not here. Here it is. By school, our elementaries are pretty commensurate in the numbers. Grade levels different. You know, there are some grade levels, we have those bubbles that happen. The elementary that's like, that's lowest is TCD. Um, in high school, the school that we've been talking about the most, I didn't break it out by grade or high school last year. Broke it out by total grade level in the district, so I don't have a comparison for that. But it's lowest. And when it comes to referrals, or excuse me, tardies, et cetera, down about 4 or 5 last year. In the first 2 months of school.
Been a huge focus. Huge
Lots.
focus.
And,
Tardiness,
yeah,
not not
Yeah.
relationship.
And so there,
It's
and
part of it.
yes, so there are differences happening. Whether that's attributed to the work or not, or different efforts.
can I have one thought? One of the things, and I think we saw this happen in the past, and it's kind of think of it sort of as a human thing. The more that there's something concrete that we can see and there's a structure and it's predictable, tends to bring down adult anxiety about things. I mean, things we just sort of know, but how that shows up post-pandemic, reopening schools, huge turnovers in staff, lots of people who didn't know what the old systems were. And so now here we are, there's been so much just predictability, profession, I mean, even showing up like in our literacy data, you know, clarity, what we're supposed to teach at K-1, 2. There's been so much of that work of the last 2 years that sometimes it's bringing just the intensity down. I mean, it's still November and, you know, people are tired, but there's just overall, sometimes that stuff kind of helps just bring down the temperature.
We're also seeing a difference so far, and I don't want to say the trend. And staff absence is positive.
Yeah.
Well, and my only point about it not being, you know, completely related to this yet is because the rollout hasn't happened. So
Right.
my 2 comments, to be taken however you want to. First of all, this is, you know, an exceptional starting point because it does brings, you know, a newness to it and a collaboration in all of your levels and everything. I appreciate the DEC saying we want to change it enough to where it feels like we're changing course a little bit. You don't want to keep everything the same and have people expect that you're gonna keep doing everything the same way that you have been. And I think that there's some value, particularly with your audience of families and community members that see, and regardless of how much teaching and training you do, they're going to see some of the stuff that is completely unrelated as a lack of consequences. So I only say, find that balance between we're changing to whatever the new term is. And just like you said, and there are still consequences. So I just throw that out there for consideration to find that balance.
And just to be clear, that had nothing to do with the DEC. That was,
I thought you said they came up with it so that it said.
no, it was the committee that developed it. So it was teachers. The DEC is made up of families and students.
Right.
So I just want to be clear.
Yeah, well,
The
how,
people who
wherever it came
I
from,
completely
committee
agree.
was the presentation.
some kind of a
Absolutely.
balance. And so here's the other just consideration. This is new and everybody's learning it and it's not collaborating, but it's,
Getting count.
yes, calibrating. And the people that are actually having to really do the nitty gritty, and some of the times it's teachers, but a lot is that your PBIS at each school, that person really has to get into this. I hope that you're open at your year end to say, is there something that didn't work? Not just calibrating with, get into it, figure it out. There could be some things in here that just are, and the only people that are gonna know that are the ones that are trying to have consequences and accountability. And they have to find out where it fits here, and they have to, you know, it just might need some changes. And for this to be that living, breathing, always getting better document, I just hope that it is.
So can I just add one thing? I keep trying to like,
Yeah, I know, Tracy,
But-
sorry.
because, and I think it pulls a lot of these different pieces together, like you were asking about our association and we have some like, how do we build accountability? How do we have some calibration? One of the things that did come out of bargaining last spring in our classroom discipline article was around, and I've just looked it back up, is about a student conduct committee at each school. So each school, assuming that we're going to ratify a contract, that you all are going to approve it. Now, we TA'd something this week. Yay. That's an important piece of all of this too, because there's a lot, so then that's a building level conversation with licensed and classified staff, reviewing data, talking about trends, what's happening, what's working, what's not. And that committee hasn't existed. So that's gonna be a new layer that I think is gonna be really important in all of the things that you've just talked about in terms of pulling all those things together. And supporting the work.
Especially from the point of those committees gets more of this and awareness out to the broader community, which is really important because that feels transparent. Like, wow, they're wanting people to be aware of it. One of the things about the QR code, and I know we're not supposed to require anything, but it feels like if anybody wants to participate in something, like a sport or drama or choir or go on a field trip or do anything, have you done your, signed your form? I don't know, just throwing it out there.
I think the students on the committee would agree with you.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. We asked all of our questions? Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. We are to the end of our meeting. I was just going over this. Yes, no, yes,
Future board agenda topics, I just wanted.
that's where I'm right at. Yes, and I realized, I thought I put something in here this afternoon and it's not.
It doesn't pop up here, it pops up on our planning spreadsheet and it is there.
Okay, because I was like, did I forget to hit go? What's your question, like, let's,
In light of the TA agreement
yeah,
and some of the, financial hardships that have hit regional districts, I would really like to see almost a financial forecast, including the bargain language, what that looks like over a 10-year horizon, so we can kind of know what's hitting. And I don't know if that works in a timeline.
All of them, right?
He said.
10 years. You just got the new forecast in from the state. Yep.
And based on that economic forecast, we do project in 2 weeks, the governor will be putting forward her first iteration of what the state school fund would look like. So this is the starting place. So certainly something that we could work on providing, whether it's before the holidays or after the new year, when there's a new superintendent in place. But I think that is an appropriate conversation for us to discuss. But as far as the TA articles, I think we would need to have a conversation with you anyway about what that actually means for the district. And again, I just give you some general implications around fund balance, here's what we have as far as, other commitments, because we have other bargaining groups that we have to make sure that we are up to date with classified, with our, license and certainly, meeting with our, district.
10-year was a totally arbitrary number. I don't know.
John's like.
The other implication that it pressed today is the PERS.
Side account.
yeah,
Side account stuff and just how that all weaves in. Makes me nervous.
We started meeting, 10 days ago, Tracy, myself and the finance team and HR. Was I there? You were not. You weren't here this week either. All right, and we're meeting again without you next week, because I do want a clear picture. So I'll have a better understanding in January where I think we are. There'll still be some unknowns like the legislature will they decide. But and we'll have some speculation related to assumptions, bargaining with class and the administrator. Things as well.
When do we vote on the contract or when do we expect?
January.
because they have to get it ratified with their members first.
And
And it doesn't go to the regional.
their process,
Time bargaining council will be somewhere in late December, so the earliest is gonna be either January board meeting or February, which, again, somebody's not here.
They would like to go as soon, we talked to them on Monday night. Tuesday night was their regional ratification, so they weren't gonna, just one day later, they weren't gonna be able to get it prepared. So December is their next regional meeting, and then they have to do some small committee work. And they're optimistic that January will be reasonable, and I'll put that in the application over them too.
Yes, so it was a good meeting, it was a good meeting.
So just to clarify though, would you want Blake to put that request on the board planner?
What request? Which one?
Technically,
Yes, yes,
Or
yes,
Mhm.
yes.
to
Okay.
include,
So, yeah.
So just saying that we're flush with money won't work.
We have enough.
We'll be
We're not
fine.
It's great. We're all good.
Joe, so on the spreadsheet, we have gone through over the last couple of times that we've gotten together with the leadership planning the agendas and tried to either identify where some of these things could go. Some of them were going into retreat meetings, some of them were going into just regular meetings. Myra, you had one about basically scheduling time, student time, high school scheduling. And some of that is being addressed in contract negotiations, new language about a committee. So it is at least still having some visibility. Some other things that have come up have been addressed, and you said mine that I put in is somewhere in the system now. Blake's gonna put one in, and I think, the only other one, let me see where that one is. Yep, nope, that one's got January as well. So, yeah, so we went through and either checked to see which ones were either done, finished, we'd already done something with them, or they needed to have more work. So that's available there. And there's something else that I was thinking about reading. You guys make sure and read. Forget what it is now. So we're up to announcements now. Any other things? Blake, you're gonna go ahead and put your thing on there, the long-term forecast. I think is how, so it doesn't look like it's tied into the upcoming budget, but you're looking for a longer term as much as.
yeah, now that we have more.
Crystal ball.
on the-
Okay, so we are at the end of the meeting, the announcements. Coming up next is December 4th, the special work session at 6 p.m. Y'all should have gotten an email about that. We got added to the meeting day that day. December 4th is also the regular board business meeting at 7 o'clock in the Council Chambers Public Safety and Schools Building. And that will be the last meeting of Superintendent Hughes. So it will be a very interesting meeting. Prepared. Business meeting, yeah, business meeting. And I think with that, there being no other business before the board, we are adjourned. Thank you.